Hello everyone, welcome back. Get comfortable, relax, and enjoy today's exciting fanfic. Now, let's begin part 3. Kakashi looked up as Kurenai entered the room, a nervous Iruka behind her. After assisting with the condolence gift for Ibiki, which consisted of a number of flowers that could be distilled to poisons and other drugs useful to a torture and interrogation specialist, Anko had left to get in place for her big entrance. As she sat down, she looked at the odds and bets scrawled on the blackboard at the end of the room. I thought it was my job to be late, Kakashi said quietly as Kurenai got out her coin purse. Shaking her head, the red-eyed Kunoichi replied. Had to arrange for a condolence basket for Ibiki. The odds on my team passing any of the exams look slim. The one-eyed Jonin nodded. Only a few people really know what he can do, and a lot of them have never seen Hinata as anything but weak. I've put a bit of money on both teams. So I see, my eternal rival, Guy said over Kakashi's shoulder as he sat on the other side of the copy ninja. Sasuke to reach the finals, but not make Chunin. Isn't that a little unyouthful? Kakashi shook his head as Asuma took a seat next to Kurenai, and Shinji sat beyond him. Sasuke has the skills to be Chunin, but he lacks the necessary attitude and maturity. He's too obsessed with revenge or his clan, and tunnel vision isn't a good trait in a ninja. Kurenai called out her bet. 50 ryo that Team 8 makes Chunin. Silence reigned as the odds were furiously calculated and put up, and others began scrambling to cover the bet. As she sat down, she noticed the lack of clan heads in the room. Hiyashi said someone called for a CRA invocation, that must be why the clan heads aren't here, she muttered. Any more on that? Asuma shook his head, but Shinji spoke up. Counselor Haruno brought it up, he said. She apparently found a reference to the Uzumaki clan, and realized that with only one member alive, the CRA had to be enacted for the boy in the interests of Konoha, which means whoever the council can convince to bribe them. Aren't you a little cynical for your age? Guy asked the youngest gentleman. Shouldn't you have a youthfully optimistic outlook as life decrees? Shinji stared at the spandex-clad ninja. That was being optimistic, he deadpanned. The room Naruto and his team found themselves in was heavily crowded, and as the other teams entered behind them, the doors closed. There were ninja from everywhere, but Naruto watched for those with a Konoha Hitai 8 first. There were 8 such teams nominated, he knew, and he could see all of them here, including his own, Sasuke's and Lee's teams. As they stood there, and killing intent began to rise and flow towards them, he saw Team 10 approaching. Choji looked no different than his usual self, nor was Ino changed, but Shikamaru looked like someone had really put him through a ringer, twice. Hey guys, Naruto called out as they approached. What happened to you, Shikamaru? The laid-back boy groaned. Remember how I said once that hating someone is too troublesome? He asked, and Naruto nodded. I've changed my mind. I really hate Shinji-sensei. Dragging the story from him would have been like pulling teeth, so Naruto turned to a far easier source of information. Ino. Shinji-sensei decided that Asuma-sensei's training regime wasn't really pushing us very hard, so he increased it a bit, had us multitasking, more physical training and sparring, a few extra jutsu each so we weren't relying on our clans, techniques all the time, that sort of thing, she told him. Then of course Shikamaru says it's all a drag and troublesome, and he'd rather just play shogi with Asuma. So Shinji-sensei says, go ahead, play shogi, but you have to do everything else at the same time and you can't look at the board. It took Shikamaru a few tries to start winning at shogi again, and he's been kind of upset with Shinji-sensei ever since. Hinata spoke quietly, but her stutter was a thing of the past now. You seem to like him, Ino, she said, curious despite herself. Ino giggled. I'm not crushing on him or anything, but Shinji-sensei has this cool and villainous air about him. He said I wasn't active enough, and that I looked hungry. I told him I was on a diet, and he insisted I write it out for him. He looked it over and handed me a different one. When I complained about what it would do to my figure he just smirked, and I felt this chill, and he said I'd just have to do more physical activity to keep my looks. She sighed, and not in a girlish, love-struck way. If anything, she seemed exasperated. He's all about results and methods. It's like he has a goal in mind for us, and if we fall over before we get there, he'll just prop us back up and tell us to keep going. Choji grunted as he put a chip in his mouth. He's effective though. Looking around, Naruto realized all 12 of Konoha's rookie teams, those who were new to the exams, were right there by the door, and attracting unwelcome attention from the other teams. A white-haired young man, around 20 if Naruto were any judge, slinked closer. Can you guys please not attract too much attention, he muttered. I barely got through my first 6 tries at this, and I'd like to survive my 7th. There was something familiar about him. He wore the Konoha Hitai 8, and a pair of glasses, but it wasn't his appearance that was nagging at Naruto. He was certain he'd remember in time, but did they have time? This stranger was still speaking, though. My name is Yakushi Kabuto, he finished up, even as Kiba took the bait. 6 times, huh, he whistled, which seemed to annoy the other shinobi. Bet you know a lot about the exams, then. His fishing for information was obvious, and the white-haired man smirked. Of course, I have no way of knowing how they're being judged this time, but I have acquired information on all the other contestants at this time, he mentioned. I keep it all encoded on these handy ninja cards, and it requires my chakra to access it. As he brought out the cards, Naruto leaned over to Shino. How long does the chakra retain its signature when your Kikaichu eat it? He whispered. Shino placed 2 fingers against his left bicep. About 20 minutes, then. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Sasuke was asking for information. Well, asking would be the polite lie, he was more demanding it. Tell me what you know about that one over there, he pointed at the redhead from Suna, as well as Neji Hyuga and Naruto Uzumaki. Oh, you make this too easy, Kabuto said as he set out his cards, and Naruto slashed his claws through them, retracting them swiftly enough that no one, except those who knew he had them, could be sure what they'd seen. Even the startled Kabuto was looking at his shredded cards. That was years of work, gone in a second. He turned to the orange-clad boy. What did you do that for? He snapped. Naruto stared at him. It was his smell, he decided. This man smelled familiar, but from where? If you think bringing those cards out in a room with so many ninja was a good idea, I can see why you failed 6 times. If any one of these ninja can siphon off your chakra, that information would be stolen. I'd like to know my enemies, too, but not at the cost of them knowing me. He turned back towards Shino and Hinata as the older shinobi stood, and began talking with them. Once the attention in the room had drifted away from him, he slid his hand from his pocket, revealing Kabuto's cards. Hinata smiled, and Shino nodded. The Kikaichu he'd seated the other man with would keep tabs on his location, and deliver his chakra when they needed it. When the cloud of smoke burst at the front of the room, a massive room now that Naruto thought about it, but still somewhat small for the large numbers of shinobi who had to be taking the examination, it revealed Morino Ibiki. The heavily scarred Jonin wasted no time. Each of you has been assigned a seating number, so I suggest you find your seat, he spoke resonantly, his voice cutting through any speaking taking place. As they did so, the genin took note that they were separated from their teammates. Now for the basic rules. Each of you has 10 points. You lose 2 points if you are caught cheating. 0 points means you and your team fail. There are 9 questions on each sheet. Getting an answer wrong loses you 1 point. At the end of the test, we reveal the 10th question. You have 45 minutes. Begin. Naruto knew something was up. He couldn't put his finger on exactly what, but nevertheless, it was a good idea to be prepared. The questions on this test were incredibly advanced, he noted, almost too difficult for even Chunin who'd failed to study hard enough. The point deduction for cheating was annoying, but, wait, it was for getting caught cheating, not the cheating itself, he realized. They wanted them to gather information, and that was Team 8's speciality. A glance at Hinata told him she was using her Byakugan surreptitiously, and copying the answers of an accurate source. Haruno Sakura, so he listened for the way her pen sounded as she wrote. Shino had his Kikaichu transmitting information in teams, tiny bugs that no one noticed. Sasuke's Sharingan allowed him something similar, and Naruto didn't doubt that others had their own methods to acquire the information. As the time slipped by, the deputy proctors began calling out numbers instead of simply tallying marks on their clipboards, removing those ninja who were insufficiently subtle. One of the Suna ninja, Konkuro if he recalled correctly, raised his hand and requested to use the bathroom, and was informed a proctor would accompany him. As he and the proctor who volunteered slipped past Naruto, he noticed that the proctor had no scent, and grinned. Did no one think to count the proctors? Or was this simply one of the first 4 times he might have been caught and still remained? By the time Konkuro had finished his business and returned, Ibiki had called the time. The test had only eliminated a handful of teams, there were still way too many. Hopefully the 10th question would bring the numbers down. Alright, then, he said, seizing the attention of the entire room. Before we reveal the 10th question, you have a few more rules to learn. First, you can decline to hear the 10th question, at which point you and your entire team will score 0 points and fail. There was a minor outburst at this. Second, he continued, cutting through the noise, if you do take the 10th question and get it wrong, you and your entire team not only fail, but you will be removed from duty as active shinobi, and banned from becoming such again. Shino saw his teammates' eyes harden at that. They had no choice, and had to reach promotion, so they would push forwards regardless, so he would too. As a few teams' nerves broke, they retreated from the room. The trickle gradually peeled away the numbers in the massive room, until finally, no more than 90 shinobi remained in their seats. It could have been fewer, though, as Ibiki began speaking. Excellent, he said, those of you remaining here have chosen to go on knowing the consequences of failure, into an unknown situation. Seated plants, you may withdraw. The equivalent of 5 teams of shinobi stood and waved at the proctors, and left the room. Those of you remaining, pass. Puzzled looks sprang up all over the room as Sakura asked the question on most of their minds. But, what about the 10th question? Ibiki smiled evilly. You already answered that, he said. The smile looked somewhat, no, downright sadistic on his face as he removed the bandana that obscured his scalp. The scars that liberally crisscrossed his scalp were a testament to the fortitude this man possessed. As shinobi, you do not always have the luxury of knowing what you're getting into, but sometimes you will know that death, or a worse fate, are waiting for you if you fail. A shinobi doesn't get to pick and choose their missions, and those who would retreat rather than take their mission are worth nothing as ninja. Now, the window shattered as a bundled figure smashed through it, hurling kunai attached to the corners of a banner into the ceiling and floor. As the pretty woman struck her pose, another kunai in hand, the writing on the banner proclaimed her to be Mitarashi Anko, proctor for the 2nd exam. She wore a trench coat, a miniskirt and a lot of netting, besides her Konoha Hitai-8, and she called out as she stood there. Tremble now, little genin, the 2nd exam is nowhere near as sedate. She paused, quickly counting, and whispered to Ibiki. You're slipping, there's far too many of them. I guess I'll have to clean up for you, again. She turned to the staring genin as she began yelling once more. All right you worms, you might actually make chunin, or at least survive the next exam. Follow me to training ground 44. With that, she leapt from the window, leading the headlong rush towards the zone nicknamed the Forest of Death. As Ibiki began picking up the test papers, Naruto cleared his throat. He and his teammates stood before the torture and interrogation specialist, and they laid out the ninja information cards that Naruto had pilfered from Kabuto. Shino's Kikaichu crawled on the cards, injecting them with the white-haired ninja's stolen chakra, causing the cards to bring out all their information. Naruto spoke quickly, before Ibiki could. Morino-sama, he said, smiling, I think you should keep an eye on Yakushi Kabuto. No one who failed that many times is that confident, and he seemed quite eager to share this information with the entire room, which would have included details about active duty Konoha shinobi. The cards require his chakra to activate, but that's no challenge for an Aburame to acquire. As the 3 genin turned to leave, Ibiki cleared his throat. I'll have this checked out, he said. But 2 questions before you go. First, what raised your suspicions? Naruto shrugged. I've never seen his face before, but he smells familiar. Given the way my past has gone, that's not a good thing. If I remember more, I'll let you know. Second question, how did the rest of the genin not notice you staying behind, especially in those orange outfits that two of you are wearing. It was Hinata's turn to answer, before they hurried to catch up with the other genin. Morino-sama, what color is a tiger? The fence was at least 20 feet tall around Training Ground 44. The very dangerous nature of the place made it one of Anko's favorite places in the world, despite the nickname, Forest of Death. As she explained this to the gathered genin, she spotted one of them, that Uzumaki Naruto that Kurenai spoke so well of, staring into the forest instead of paying attention. A hurled kunai, intended to wake him up, was deflected over his shoulder with a negligent slap, where it landed close to a group of ninja from Kusagaku. Naruto, however, inhaled deeply. Hinata-chan, he said slowly as the Hyuga girl glared at the proctor. Hi, she replied, without pausing in her glaring. I like this place, he said. It's honest. Forest of Death. It's not hiding, it just is. He turned towards the Jonin with purple hair. You were saying. Anko assessed the boy. He had been paying attention, she now realized. He was just paying attention to more than just her speech. The second exam is a survival mission, with a twist, she announced, in that each team will be issued a scroll, marked as an Earth or Heaven scroll. You will have 5 days to reach the tower within this training ground, against everything the Forest of Death can throw at you. However, it's not that simple. You have a couple of rules to follow if you want to succeed. First, you may not open the scrolls. You will not like what happens if you do, and then you will fail the test as well. Second, you cannot enter the tower unless you meet 3 conditions. You must get there within the 5 days, with both an Earth and a Heaven scroll. You must have a full team. If one of you dies, then you fail. Other than that, have fun. She pointed to a number of tables with paperwork stacked on them. Before you receive your scrolls in those covered booths over there, you have to fill out those waivers. They acknowledge that you are entering this test of your own free will, and that no one can hold it against us if you die or something. You hand in 3 waivers, and you get 1 scroll. After that, I'll see you later. Team 8 were the first team to grab their waivers and trade them in. Inside the covered booth, they received a Heaven scroll, and as they emerged they saw the purple-haired Jonin frozen on the spot as she spoke curtly with a grass nin with an excessively long tongue, that was apparently prehensile, by the kunai she was delivering to the proctor. The genin glanced at their gate number, and raced to get there. Inside the forest, Team 8 was more or less in their element. Between Naruto's ability to follow scents and Hinata's Byakugan, they could avoid most of the predators that would be a problem, and Shino's Kikaichu could scout on a level beyond what most could manage. Not even Naruto's shadow clones could match the numbers Shino had in his colony. Together, they began to set their plans. By unspoken agreement, the Konoha teams were avoiding each other as targets. Team 9 had the good fortune to encounter an unlucky band of Omegakure ninja with a Heaven scroll, before the Rain Nin could set an ambush or battle plan. They then began a run for the tower, although Lee insisted they take some time to see how Sakura's team was managing. Ino stepped back out of her target's mind. They have an Earth scroll, she told Shikamaru. Gah, he grunted. Even with all the training Shinshi-sensei put us through, getting the right scroll is going to be such a drag. Choji, can you make them go away? Buben Kakudai no Jutsu. The Akamaiki's arm suddenly became massive as Shikamaru jumped away, and the Kiri ninja stumbled as the Nara released them a fraction of a second before Choji's arm hit, launching them out into the forest. Ino held her hand above her eyes as she watched the other team disappear into the trees. Okay, let's find another ambush to bust then, shall we? Kabuto glared at his teammates. They were fools, but they were what he had. They and their sensei were actually deep cover agents, recruited by him for his master. The white-haired ninja was a little bothered by the loss of his cards. He'd been quite impressed by the skill it took to switch the cards he'd made for regular playing cards before Uzumaki destroyed them. There had only been 2 ninja close enough to manage the trick, and that Naruto, despite the rumors, Kabuto was certain the brat's only real talents lay in refusing to die when he should, and SL, 8 of hand. Looking back at the hapless Takigakure team his companions had slaughtered for their scroll, he smiled. I'm going to check on something, he called out. I'll meet you at the tower in a few days. Naruto stared down from his hiding place at the clearing filled with sand, blood and bodies. A quick glance to Hinata followed by her nod, and he knew she'd seen the same thing too. None of the Suna ninja had so much as lifted a finger against this rain team. They didn't have to. Gaara's sand had done all the work, and the rain ninja had died in a horrible way, buried alive and crushed by the sand. Gaara glared at the scroll they found. Earth, useless, he growled, and looked at the bodies as he threw the scroll aside. Mother says they were not enough. She needs more blood. Come along. To the hidden eyes of Team 8, it seemed even Gaara's family was terrified of him. Unnoticed, a swarm of Shino's insects recovered the scroll. It was not his day, thought Kiba as he leapt, ran, dodged a giant snake, leapt some more, sprang from tree to tree and dodged the giant snake again. The rock he and Akamaru had answered nature's call on had turned out to be a massive snake, one that was not happy with how they'd woken it up, to say the least. He'd been running for the past 10 minutes, and his stamina was starting to flag, and his sandal slipped as he hit the branch, toppling forwards while his partner fell back, into the snake's mouth. Kiba's wordless howl of despair rang out through the trees, and he shut his eyes as the snake closed its jaws, which was a real pity, as he missed the two orange blurs that skipped through the branches, one slamming both her feet against the underside of the very branch he'd just fallen from as Hinata caught him before he fell very far, swinging him to the next branch down where Shino was waiting to catch him, as the other blur sprang into the very mouth of the giant snake to gather up the small white dog. Naruto's wardrobe had needed some redesign after the mission to Nami no Kuni, and Kujaku Dansei had been quite proud of the outfit Naruto now wore, with the flaps and panels over the areas where Naruto could most easily manipulate his bones into protrusions, knees, elbows, shoulders, shoulder blades and a whole series along his spine. As the orange-clad shinobi caught the ninja hound, preventing the small canine becoming an appetizer, he also pushed his chakra into those areas, and the bone metal spikes and blades emerged, driving into the soft tissues of the snake's mouth, convincing it that this meal wasn't worth the trouble. As the oversized serpent reopened its mouth, Naruto lashed out with his right hand, his claws extending, feeding his chakra into them to extend their reach and sharpness, and the claws broke through the snake's brain, whereupon the summoned creature vanished with a pop and a puff of smoke. Pulling in his spikes, Naruto hastily made a hand sign, and several of his shadow clones caught him, throwing him to the branch where his team waited with Kiba. Kiba-san, Shino spoke quickly once the boy was reunited with his best friend, where's your team? Surely you three didn't split up. Sasuke and Sakura glared at the grass ninja as she stood there, her head at a slight angle. The fact that Kiba hadn't returned had the two worried, but Sakura had taken it as a godsend, and was discussing the limitations of the CRA with Sasuke, a subject he'd had little interest in until she told him of the lack of choice he'd have, until the stranger had entered their campsite. Now they stood ready to fight, but the sheer killing intent radiating from the other ninja had paralyzed them. As things stood they were in trouble. This ninja was too much for them. Sasuke pulled their heaven scroll from his equipment pouch, and held it up. This is what you want, isn't it? I can tell when we're overmatched, it's yours if you let us go. Sakura couldn't believe what she was hearing. Sasuke was giving up. What are you doing, Sasuke? She whispered. We can't advance without that. Sasuke spat to one side. For such an intelligent girl, you can sure say stupid things, he growled. We can't advance if we're dead, either, and there are other scrolls out there. Indeed, the other ninja said, stepping closer. Like this one. She held up an earth scroll and continued to approach. Not that I care, since my team is dead. Sakura's eyes widened. How? What happened to them? The grass ninja shrugged. They were in my way, so I killed them just to enjoy their screams. But even those were disappointing. Now I have you right where I want you. The Fuma shuriken that drove into the ground in front of the other ninja stopped her advance. Standing on the branches of the trees at the south end of the clearing were Team 8, Kiba and Akamaru, who was happily barking at the two Konoha genin. Naruto spoke up. I'd be careful about him, Sasuke, that guy smells of blood and snakes, he called out. I'd trust him as far as I could spit him, and there's nothing that would convince me to put anything of Orochimaru's anywhere near my mouth. The grass ninja began laughing with a mad intensity. So the little experiment lived, after all. I was wondering if it was you, boy. With an even more sudden focus, the ninja's hands flickered to begin a summoning, as the earth scroll he held was flicked up to spin in the air, obviously intended to land back in the summoner's hand once he'd finished. But that wasn't what happened. As the scroll began its upward arc, the Fuma shuriken popped, revealing itself to be a transformed shadow clone, who then sprang upward and drove a spiky knee into the face of the ninja before him, snatching the scroll from the air as he did, and hurling it to Sasuke before dispersing. The blood pouring from the victim's face obscured their vision as the clone vanished, and Naruto's cry of, Plan 6, RTFA, was followed by a number of shadow clones dogpiling the target ninja as the 6 genin fled. They were not expecting the sound of tearing flesh behind them, nor did they dream that the infamous missing nin was capable of stretching his neck so far, biting into the muscle of Sasuke's shoulder and injecting something there. As the head fell back and away, and Naruto's shadow clones began to disperse at a prodigious rate, Orochimaru laughed. Should you live, Sasuke, you will need power for your vengeance. Come to me and I can give it to you. Naruto and Kiba caught hold of Sasuke before he could fall as the Uchiha passed out, and all 5 conscious genin pushed themselves hard to reach the tower before something worse happened. Reaching the tower was easier said than done, with a number of other teams lying in ambush, and the 2 teams were forced to take refuge in a massive hollowed tree. Laying Sasuke's fevered form down, they inspected the injury that the Snake Master had inflicted. There was a bite mark. 2 half-circles of teeth had driven through the skin, and inside those marks were 3 comma-like marks arrayed against each other in a circular pattern. The skin about them was reddened, and black veins seemed to carry the taint of the mark deeper into Sasuke's body. That's not good, Naruto said. I know some basic sealing, but this thing is so far beyond what I know they're not even related. Hinata's use of her Byakugan had revealed the mark was forcing some kind of black chakra, a negative chakra, into Sasuke's system. By sealing some of his tenketsu around it, she'd slowed the advance, but things were definitely bad. It was to the scene of Sasuke's unconscious form that the other 2 Konoha teams reached this clearing. Each had managed to acquire the scrolls they needed, and all they needed to do was get to the tower, but that would not be as easy as it looked. Kabuto reached the tree above the clearing. Taking note of the numbers, he shook his head. Too many for Otogakure no Sato's official team, he decided. A pity, he'd have loved to see what that curse mark did to Sasuke. A plan for reaching the tower was quickly sketched out, even as Sasuke groaned, his fevered sleep troubled with the pain of the tainted chakra. Neji was against the plan to begin with. If he is fated to live, he will. Otherwise, he will slow us down, as weak as he is, he stated. Naruto glared at his fiance's cousin, but Hinata's hand on his arm kept him from losing his temper. Then don't help, Neji ni-san, she replied. But since your team is going that way anyway, we will all go with you. If your defending yourself happens to benefit us, then I guess your precious fate doesn't govern what we do, does it? Neji had no answer for that, and settled into a grumpy silence. All right, Shino said, as he and Shikamaru rose from where they'd laid out the plan to the others. Does anyone have any thoughts on the plan? Looking around at the other Konoha rookies, he saw no objections, and nodded. The speed with which Shikamaru had laid out a plan once Naruto asked for one pointed to him considering a similar scenario at some point, and such forethought almost guaranteed the young man's rise to Chunin at some not too distant time, even if he didn't manage it here at these exams. Shikamaru had been somewhat lazy, very much a boy to go for, least effort for most effect, until this Shinshi-sensei had gotten hold of Team 10's training. Now he actually had greater endurance and chakra reserves that he could bring to bear, not an insignificant thing for his family's techniques. Team 9's role was vanguard. With such hitters as Neji and Lee, and Tenten's skill with storage scrolls and weapons, which her adoptive father, Unagi Jobu, had been teaching her for years before the academy, they made an effective forward strike force, intended to clear the path. Team 10 was to provide close support for Team 7, with Choji carrying the unconscious Sasuke as both teams made their run. With both Sakura and Ino looking out for him, Sasuke could not be in more protective hands, although Shikamaru idly pondered who was going to protect the Uchiha boy from them. Finally, Team 8 had a sort of rearguard position. Not only did they have to cover the back of the other teams, but they were the decoys, meant to attract the attention of anyone who came after the weakest genin. Strangely, that last twist was suggested by Naruto, a minor touch compared to the overall plan, but it was an idea that had merit in Shikamaru's eyes, so it had to be a good one. The other teams had barely left the clearing, with a surreptitious escort of a few shadow clones, when the first challenge to the plan occurred, as three ninja wearing Hitai-8 bearing the emblem of a crescent moon, the sign of Yorigakure no Sato, the village hidden in the night, entered the clearing. As the two opposing teams stood and stared at each other, the Yuru ninja began to grin, feral grins that bore little resemblance to the smiles of amusement most people gave, and seemed more suited to hunting animals who've found their prey. High in the tree, Kabuto sat up. So many little dramas, so much variety to choose from, and this eventuated. He was sure the Otogakure team would have confronted the Konoha ninja by now, but they were apparently too busy elsewhere, but here he got to see the capabilities of this Team 8 of Konoha, Team Kurenai if they made Chunin together, unless she went for a different name, and he got to assess the totally unknown techniques of what may have been the most secretive of the shinobi villages, the oldest existing village, barely younger than the lost Uzushiogakure no Sato. Closer attention was merited. The strangers didn't speak, Hinata noticed. Instead, they merely set themselves ready to fight, and charged. As they did, their bodies shifted, just a little, becoming more animalistic, taking on features of animals here and there. The one that rushed the Hyuga in the Uzumaki jacket seemed to be melded, if that was the right term, with a rabbit of all things. Hinata activated her Byakugan and saw the chakra condensing in the opposing Kunoichi's legs. It would be a good idea to avoid the kicks, then. Shino's foe had horns, two of them, appear along his nose as his skin grayed and thickened, his charge becoming vicious and almost unstoppable. Raising his staff and extending it from its collapsed and portable form, he braced. This would need some time. Naruto's foe on the other hand, that was trickier. His hair had been replaced by feathers, his eyes became a solid black, and wings emerged from his back as his feet left the ground in more of a swoop than a charge, and the two ninjata he raised were aimed straight at the Konoha Jinchuriki. The deep cover spy certainly hadn't been expecting this. Orochimaru had dabbled in this branch of research at one time, with no real success due to the burnout its subjects suffered, before deeming it inferior and discarding it. Now it looked like someone had perfected it. This was worth noting. Kabuto took out a scroll and started taking notes very quickly. As Hinata ducked beneath another kick, her opponent lifted her other foot from the ground and it swept past Hinata's face as she leaned back just barely enough for it to miss, her fringe and bangs flying up in the passing foot slipstream, even as the rabbit girl cartwheeled to land on her feet. Seeing the first opening she'd had this fight, the young Hyuga darted in, melding wind and water chakra into her gentle fist, producing something like a storm in her opponent's tenketsu, a gentle storm, that sounded like a good name. The wind element caused actual damage to the chakra coils, while the water element allowed the gentle fist impact to shock wave out from the point of impact, shutting down multiple tenketsu at once. Struck in the lower back, the Yuru Kunoichi lost the center of her chakra network right away, and her animal features disappeared as she collapsed, unable to move her legs. Naruto's usual techniques wouldn't work on this enemy, and he knew it. He could try bombarding the Hawk Man with shadow clones, but with those wings, the other ninja could change direction in midair, and Naruto's clones couldn't, not easily. There was only one moment he could strike his foe, at the very moment his foe struck him. Extending his claws, Naruto began to channel chakra to his ears. His sense of smell was of no help here. Hinata and Shino had their own problems, and to top it all off, his passenger chose this moment to start making a ruckus. Whiskers, brat, the Kyuubi was shouting as Naruto tried to focus. Cats and foxes have them for a reason. You have to feel him with your whiskers. Naruto managed to push the fox's voice down beyond his awareness, but something rang true. Expanding his chakra a little, he fed it into his whisker marks as well. As they flared blue and grew, he felt something, the wind. No. Motions that shifted the wind. A fox or cat used its whiskers to tell how far away something was, to help with balance, or to shift in confined spaces. Combined with his hearing, Naruto had a chance, just one, because once his opponent knew about this trick, he'd compensate for it, and Naruto would lose. His only advantage now lay in surprise. Shino stared at his now unconscious foe as he discarded his shattered staff. That had been too close, he felt. His staff had broken just as his Kikaichu had managed to take his enemy down from chakra exhaustion, a very close thing. His insects were now gorged on the chakra, and would be of little help until they'd slept it off, or discharged it in another manner. He turned towards the others as Hinata took out her opponent, and saw Naruto's whisker marks glow, and then very nearly shine, as he poured chakra into them. It was over in a split second, but for that split second Hinata's heart was in her throat, her Byakugan, still active, allowing her to see the whole thing with absolute clarity. The Hawk Ninja swooped in, too fast for Shino to follow, his blades aimed at Naruto's back, and Hinata could do nothing but stand there, screaming her beloved's name. Naruto felt the movement, he knew the direction, he pushed the distraction of his love scream away so he could live and manage to come back to her. He turned in an instant, stabbing out with his claws and twisting his arms outward, even as he poured chakra into the bones of his skull, plating and studding his forehead with bone metal, and a layer of chakra cushioning his brain. The blades his foe had in front of him were swept aside by Naruto's claws, the cheap metal breaking as they twisted, carrying the Hawk Ninja's arms with them, and the blonde shinobi swung his head against his opponent's, impacting square on his foe's Hitai 8. Naruto had been wearing his Hitai 8 around his neck of late, much like Hinata did, and his bone metal brow was far stronger anyway. There was a horrendous sickening crunch as the swooping Hawk man collided with the young genin, and both crashed to the ground, rolling and tumbling across the clearing, bleeding off the inertia and momentum of the collision before halting in a heap. Hinata was the first there, her Byakugan shutting off in a subconscious choice to avoid seeing the worst for as long as possible, and Shino joined her at the tangled pile of limbs as the Hawk features faded from the Yuru ninja. That one was dead, she could see. Not only did his neck loll at a most unnatural angle, she knew that the forehead was supposed to curve outwards. His didn't, and his Hitai 8 was embedded in the brow as well. Using branches, they forced the body off their teammate. Naruto's eyes were unfocused, and his neck and back were sore, although the pain was rapidly retreating. There was a red mark on his forehead once the bone metal had retreated, and he looked up. "Am I dead, and in heaven?" he asked, very confused. "No," a worried Hinata replied. "Why would you think that?" "Because I see 3 Hinatas, and if even one's not heaven, I don't want to go," the blue-eyed Jinchuriki answered with a goofy smile. After that fight, they decided to waste no time, and quickly set off in pursuit of their fellow Konoha rookies. In the tree far above, Kabuto stood, putting away the scroll with so much written on it. It seems that Orochimaru-sama was correct about the Kamanahito inferiority, he mused silently. Beast people seem to rely more on instinct than intellect. But that Uzumaki, that most certainly wasn't the dead bone pulse, but it was close to it. Did that experiment work, after all? What else happened though? That thing with his whisker marks, the speed he recovered at, those bones looked like metal, too. Did we awaken a Nukeke Genkei in the boy? Either way, it looks like we discarded him too soon. I think I'll drop out after this round. I won't be very useful if I'm dead. The atrium of the tower was empty, and the poetic advice inscribed on the wall was an obscure reference to training methods. Shino managed to put the clues together and opened their scrolls, each team having kept their heaven and earth scrolls to bring here. Naruto was sitting propped against a pillar, still a bit concussed, although he was getting better so fast it was almost miraculous. 5 minutes more, tops, and he'd be fine. As the scrolls poured out smoke, their sensei appeared before them, smiling broadly. Kurenai had heard from the other teams as they arrived about the events in the forest, although her team had obviously had a little more trouble afterwards. But that was what they had been the decoys for. The hard job, the one the other teams were not as suited for. "Welcome to the tower, Team 8, she said, pride evident in her tone. "Congratulations on passing the second exam." Her eyes traveled over her students, assessing their injuries, and attempting to divine their mental state. "Before anything else, your friends made it in plenty of time, and Kakashi has called on someone far more experienced with seals than he to deal with Sasuke's affliction. There's someone else in a similar situation to Sasuke who can provide some counseling, but we can't be certain he'll be okay at this point." She waved for them to follow her. Now, You've been out there for 2.5 days, so I think you'll all want to get clean, fed and rested. There's a 3-person room set aside for each team in this tower, so you have somewhere to rest up as you wait. The room was comfortable enough, and the 3 genin greeted the other Konoha rookies. As other nations' teams were present, there were no vast displays of boisterousness, and the information they handed around was low-level gossip at most. Ino and Sakura were both worried about Sasuke, when they weren't quietly hissing at each other over who loved him more, and their friends looked out for them. When the Suna team showed up, they didn't approach, although Gaara did stare somewhat obsessively, almost hungrily at Naruto. The teams that made it in over the next 2 days were mostly foreign. Kumo's team, the inverted squad consisting of a young man named Ginkumo Kura, and 2 girls, the Nusuma sisters as they were called, Fukuro and Suzume, despite their looking nothing alike, with their sensei, a dark-skinned man answering to Sagigiso, were polite, although the genin of the team paid closer attention to Hinata and Neji than any others. It was possible that Kumogakure's first official representatives to enter Konoha in a decade were nervous about the Hyuga incident from so long ago, but that answer didn't feel right. The Iowa team were much more easy to explain, even if their famous sensei kept watching Naruto for some reason. That ruby eye gave him the creeps. The genin were a different matter. Kyoriki Koshi and Tamaishi Tobu were of a type, both were obviously heavy hitters who could hold their own, with thickly muscled bodies. Their teammate, however, resembled a marble statue more than a little, a delicate one that belonged in some noble's hall, rather than a kunoichi. Still, there was that adage about books and their covers, and judging them thereby. The 4th foreign team was from a smaller, newly established hidden village, Otogakure no Sato, and consisted of a young man with enough bandages covering him to qualify as an emergency ward, another boy who kept his palms hidden, and a kunoichi with a large number of small pouches all over her clothes. All 3 kept to themselves, not giving out their names, and wore pants with a snake skin pattern in blue. The last team to arrive, barely ahead of the deadline, was another Konoha team, Kabuto's team to be precise, and all the genin teams were called to assemble in the atrium. There had been a lot of changes made to it, with a raised dais at one end before a massive statue of a shinobi performing a hand sign. There was a raised balcony around the room, and it was here that the many sensei stood as their teams assembled below. Sasuke was there, the mark on his neck ringed by 2 circles of tiny seals so close together they could be mistaken for a single circle. His eyes were a little shadowed, from a lack of sleep, no doubt, and he gruffly muttered his thanks to Team 8 as he took his place. On the dais stood the Hokage, as well as the sensei of the foreign teams and the proctors from the Chunin exams. The unfamiliar proctor was a sickly-looking man, but he still stood there, a Konoha ninja to be sure. Hiruzen stepped forward and began to speak. Congratulations to all of you here who have made it to the next stage of the exams, the little war that stands in place of actual war between the nations. It is here that our genin show what they can do, and the strength of their villages is represented in the 3rd exam, single combat. As things, a cough from the 3rd proctor interrupted the old man, and the sickly ninja spoke. Your pardon, Hokage-sama, but if you don't mind, I can take over from here. As the Hokage stepped back, waving for the proctor to continue, the ninja coughed again. My name is Gecko Hayate Cough and I am the proctor for the next stage of the Chunin exams, he announced. As things stand, Cough, there are too many candidates to undertake that next step, so we will be holding preliminary matches immediately, to determine who advances to the tournament stage in 1 month's time. The Cough, first thing I must ask is if any of you here wish to withdraw at this time. Kabuto raised his hand. Our efforts outside have depleted my chakra and stamina, he explained, even as Ibiki exchanged a glance with the Hokage, receiving a barely perceptible nod. I have to formally withdraw. As he turned and walked away, he muttered to his companions. You know what to do. The proctor watched him leave and nodded. Is there anyone else? Very well. He pointed to a large electronic display screen, a rarity anywhere, which might be a form of boasting should one choose to take it that way, a great hidden village flaunting its wealth with such a thing. If you will pay Cough attention to the board, we will randomly select the Cough opponents for the preliminaries. As the board began to flicker, a name and picture appearing on each side and changing as they were randomized, Sasuke snorted in disbelief of the proctor's statement. Such matchups were far too important to leave to chance. Then the two names appeared on the board. Hyuga Hinata vs Kinuta Dosu. The other genin were instructed to leave the floor and head up to the balcony, but Naruto took a few seconds to embrace his fiancée. You can beat him, Hinata Hime, he whispered into her ear. But watch out, alright, when he moves his arms, my ears hurt. With a quick kiss on her cheek, he went to stand by Kurenai and Shino. The bandage-swathed Oto ninja stood before her, his arms dangling and his feet wide set. So, did your boyfriend say goodbye? Or is he going to join you in hell? The foreign ninja taunted. Actually, the soft-spoken Kunoichi replied, he was telling me to kick your Hajime, called Hayate, his voice washing over Hinata's. As Hinata's Byakugan roared to life, filling her senses with her surroundings, filing away Naruto's reactions and words for later, her opponent rushed forwards, his arms swinging, a faint whistling following as they moved. She could see the chakra flowing into his arms, collecting in the many hold devices there, as clearly as she could see Naruto's wince as the noise reached him. The only advantage she could see was that his moves seemed to require a build-up, a long sweeping strike. If he charged, as he'd done now, whatever attack he was planning would have that build-up and he could use a linear strike, but otherwise he would need roundhouse blows. Dodging his first attack was the way to go, then, and after that stay in close quarters where the gentle fist technique's linear style would be faster than his return strike. But he seemed too confident, she noticed, her Byakugan relaying the sloppiness of his taijutsu style, as if he didn't care whether or not he hit, because he only needed to get close. Dosu grinned beneath his bandages as the girl's eyes widened. She was obviously terrified by the speed and ferocity of his assault, not that he'd go easy on her for that. As he pulled his arms back to strike, she did something, and a set of bracers and greaves hit the floor as she disappeared, only to suddenly be there in his face, with his arms out of position to block, a determined look on her face as both her own arms struck at his shoulders, palm first, calling out, "Gentle storm, chakra shockwave." Indeed, that was exactly what it felt like, as his shoulders popped audibly with her strikes and a wave of chakra rippled down his arms, blowing out his chakra network from the inside painfully, dispersing all his gathered chakra in a single burst with no way to control it. Dosu couldn't understand it. Just seconds ago she'd been terrified, he'd seen her eyes widen. How did this happen? His momentum redirected by her attack, his legs flying forward even as his torso stopped all forward motion, the Oto genin spotted, as he arced over, crashing head first onto the stone-tiled floor, the veins around her eyes, a Hyuga. He'd been up against the cursed Byakugan. His impact with the floor disrupted his awareness as he hit, a concussion at the least if he was any judge, the nausea felt about right for it, and any disorientation now was. His mind blanked out as the last thing he saw before falling into the darkness of sweet oblivion was a rapidly approaching palm. Hinata watched her unconscious foe for a moment. She had pulled her blow before impact and the gentle storm strike she'd been working on had still knocked her foe cold. She was certain that if she'd made contact it would not have gone so well for this Dosu. Swallowing audibly, Gecko Hayate then raised his right hand. The winner, Hyuga Hinata. Looking up at the balcony, all that Hinata could see, or care about was the broad smile of pride and joy on Naruto's face. Kurenai smiled as she looked across to where Shinji stood with Asuma and Team 10. Pick me up at 7, Asuma, she said, and the other Jonin nodded blankly. Now she got her fancy dinner rather than going to that barbecue place, and Asuma would know better than to bet against her in matters involving her team. The board was flickering again, revealing the next two to fight, and as she saw Hinata in Naruto's arms, speaking softly about whatever, she hoped they'd have some time before Naruto's fight. Unagi Tenten vs Akamichi Choji. Tenten and Choji's match didn't take very long, as Choji opted to use his human boulder technique from the start. Tenten, however, didn't hesitate, sending forth an array of kunai that were deflected by her fellow Konoha genin's spinning form. As Choji advanced, she then threw another volley, this one of Senbon, that littered the ground in front of him, stuck upright in the floor. The young Akamichi's own force and speed drove the paralytic-coated needles into his skin, and Choji was done. Winner, Unagi Tenten, proclaimed Hayate, as the board began to select the next match. Abumi Zaku vs Nusuma Suzume. No sooner had the cough-ridden proctor called Hajime, Zaku raised high arms, palm outwards, towards the Kumo Kunoichi, whose hands were flickering through hand seals incredibly quickly, so quickly that only Kakashi and Sasuke could keep up with them. At first nothing seemed to happen as Suzume completed the last seal, but then Zaku's eyes widened, and he begged him to unleash wind blasts at something only he could see, hammering away at thin air as he stared and screamed, while Suzume calmly announced her technique. Genjutsu technique. Hyaku Suzume no Jigoku. Calmly walking up to her now terrified foe, still striking blindly at things no one else could see, Suzume jabbed a sleep venom-coated needle into his neck, and the Odo ninja was out like a light. As Hayate called the winner, everyone reassessed the small, plain girl with mousy brown hair. With a genjutsu like that under her belt, she was far, far more than she looked to be. Again the board flickered, and the next to fight were revealed. It was impossible. Fate was never this kind, as to grant this kind of heartfelt wish. Neji turned his attention to the Uchiha, and saw the smirk, and realized what had to have happened. Someone had heard of his encounter with this boy before the first exam, of the fight Lee had stopped, and set this up for the last loyal Uchiha. Again he returned his attention to the board and the match-up displayed there as he descended the stairs at the same deliberate pace as his opponent. Uchiha Sasuke vs Hyuga Neji. Hayate glanced nervously at the Hokage, who nodded. This fight, no matter who won it, would upset the current balance of power in Konoha. If it fell towards the Uchiha, the civilian counselors would gain, and by further implication, the elder advisors, and Danzo. If Hyuga Neji came out on top, Hiashi and the other shinobi clans would benefit. Hajime, he called. It began with a series of rapid hand signs by the Uchiha boy, as he attempted the genjutsu the Kumo Kunoichi had so badly beaten her opponent with. But Neji's Byakugan easily penetrated the illusion, shattering Sasuke's technique. The Sharingan was not precise enough to mimic the Tenketsu blocking effect of the gentle fist, and the elemental natures required for gentle storm were beyond the Uchiha. They were also beyond Neji, who was firmly earth-aspected in his affinity, not that he'd developed it. So Neji closed as Sasuke began to perform another jutsu. Sasuke's water prison was a half-remembered technique, seen months ago and never practiced. Even with his Sharingan, Sasuke nearly didn't pull it off, but as the water was pulled out of thin air, he realized this was a bad technique for him. It had to have taken at least 2/3 of his remaining chakra to pull off with both his own natures opposed to it. Of course, it might have been worth it, with the overconfident Hyuga inside the globe of water. Sasuke began to run through a new sequence, almost losing the prison as he did. It was hard to split your chakra control like that, and the globe of water rippled, even as the Uchiha boy manifested a needle of lightning chakra that he drove towards the globe. Neji had been startled by the water prison, and had gasped, a good thing as it seemed, giving him lungs filled with air. He began to worry as Sasuke ran through the hand seals to enact the lightning needle, but when the surface of the globe, and the chakra holding it in shape, rippled, he saw an opportunity. As the needle was thrust towards the water prison, Neji struck, his gentle fist strike punching through the weakened surface of the water and jabbing into the tenketsu on Sasuke's arm, dispersing the needle. A second strike, delivered as Sasuke lost control of the water prison, took away the other arm's channels, and Neji slid into the 8 trigrams stance. Sasuke didn't stand a chance as Neji launched his attack. 8 trigrams, 64 palms. As an incapacitated Sasuke dropped to the floor, Neji turned away. Even you, a mighty Uchiha, could not overcome fate, he said, and took a step as Hayate called the winner. The sudden surge of killing intent from the boy on the floor froze almost everyone in the room. As Neji looked back, he saw Sasuke forcing himself to his feet, and the Byakugan showed a black, negative chakra blowing open his tenketsu points, but the scary thing was his eyes. Sasuke's eyes were still rolled back in his head, he was still unconscious. A shock of fear poured through Neji as he stood there, unable to move, and suddenly Kakashi was there, making a hand seal that caused the second ring of seals around Sasuke's curse mark to flare, and the Uchiha heir collapsed. The copycat ninja lifted his student over one shoulder. I see we still need to work on containing it, he said. With a quick and awkward bow, He disappeared in a swirl of leaves, as did the second proctor, the purple-haired Kunoichi, as the board again flickered, distracting most witnesses from what had just happened. Kabuto looked at the bodies strewn about him. He supposed he should be flattered, 4 Anbu just for him, but this meant something was wrong. He'd just have to cut his losses and take his current information back to Orochimaru. It was just a pity he'd have to wait to see how the little experiment had turned out. Gaara vs Tsuchi-kin. Oh, hell, no. I forfeit. The Oto Kunoichi ignored the angry stare from the Suna redhead. I am not facing that. Shrugging, the watchers turned their attention to the board again. Kankuro vs Kyoriki Koshi. The opening strikes of the match saw the muscular body of Koshi stock still and immovable, as Kankuro dropped his bundle and rushed in, essaying a few strikes that were easily deflected before dropping his jaw, as if on a hinge, and spraying a purple mist into the surprised Iwa ninja's face, even as the impossibly strong counter blow shattered Kankuro's right arm, scattering chunks of wood about the room even as the bundle that had been dropped earlier unraveled and stood, revealing the real Kankuro, and the one that had engaged the foe was just a puppet. Enraged, Koshi took one step, and toppled over. The purple mist is a paralytic toxin unique to Kei's no Kuni and Suna village, he told the Iwagakure shinobi as he held up a vial of silvery liquid. This is the antidote. Without TIHS, the toxin's effects run their course over a week, a painful one. I'm told it feels like fire ants swarming you. Give up, and I'll be generous. Koshi couldn't surrender fast enough. Aburame Shino vs Nara Shikamaru. As the two genin faced each other across the arena, Shikamaru sank into a crouch and put his fingers together. He just sat there for 10 minutes. Not wishing to waste his own chakra, and respecting another strategist, Shino let him. Eventually, Shikamaru stood and began to walk away. I forfeit, he said back over his shoulder. Maybe my shadows can pin you down, Shino, but there's too many of your Kikaichu for me to keep track of, and once they get into my chakra, that's all she wrote. I don't have any jutsu for dealing with them. Blinking, Ino spoke up, sort of. Wah, Shinshi shook his head as he explained to her. Shikamaru's affinity is water, surprisingly. Fire jutsu, which would be the best option for dealing with Shino's insects, chew through too much of his chakra. While certain water jutsu might work, the effects of using them would likely cause his colony to revolt, the results aren't pretty. So Shikamaru took the chance to bow out gracefully. The fourth gentleman narrowed his eyes. But he's not getting off that easily, a mind like that deserves to be a chunin. They turned their eyes to the next match-up. All around the atrium, jaws dropped, and a loud, energetic whoop sprang from both participants, who promptly leapt over the railings. Uzumaki Naruto vs Rock Lee. As the two Konoha ninja waited tensely for Hayate to call for the fight to begin, Guy appeared next to the Hokage. If you will excuse me, Hokage-sama, perhaps we should move this gathering to the balcony. Raising an eyebrow, and receiving a serious-faced nod, Hiruzen agreed. When Hayate called, Hajime, the two genin moved, quick strikes to test their opponent's defenses. They sprang back after a few blows, Lee shaking out his hands. Your body is quite sturdy, Naruto-san, Lee said, once more balling up his fists. Your inner youth is quite impressive. You're pretty fast, Lee-san, Naruto replied, but I can keep up if I push it a bit. There was another blur of motion as Lee charged in, sweeping a leg in a low feint that changed direction halfway, and powered towards the Jinchuriki's ribs. Naruto's reaction was to grip the leg as it struck, pinning the limb against his body, and Lee's other foot left the ground in a spiraling arc that caught Naruto on the crown of his skull with a loud and terrible crack, forcing him to release the spandex-clad young man who cartwheeled back and stopped, dropping to one knee. The blonde shook his head, and a little blood flew from his scalp. Hinata covered her mouth with both hands, her fingernails digging into her cheeks, but unwilling to look away. The Jonin looked on, wondering what the crack had been caused by, as Guy stood by the railing. Naruto had taken that blow direct to his crown, from Lee's full-strength kick, admittedly with his training weights on, actually from the training weights themselves, and he was a little dizzy with a small scalp wound. What had happened? Was that sound from the boy's skull, or Lee's leg? Guy-sensei, Lee called out, no pain evident in his voice, which set Guy's mind a little at ease as he turned. It was a pity about Naruto losing, but a head injury that cracked the skull was nothing to laugh at. What is it, Lee? He called back. I am requesting permission to remove my weights, Guy-sensei, Lee replied. 3 on my left leg have been broken, and I believe Uzumaki-san presents an adequate adversary, a most youthful rival, to overcome. Guy tried to wrap his mind around this odd fact. Lee's training weights, on impact with Naruto's skull, had broken. But they were steel, engraved with special gravity seals to both make them heavier and extend their influence over the entire body. When steel, especially that steel, met bone, it shouldn't be the bone that broke the steel. He looked over at the orange-clad shinobi, who had taken a cloth from his pocket to clean the blood from his face and staunch the bleeding, as he put said cloth away. He wasn't bleeding anymore, and he'd done little more than swipe absently at the wound. It was hard, but it had to be done. Permission granted, Lee, but exercise good judgment and caution. A delighted Lee jumped up, the weights from his leg warmers in each hand. Thank you, Guy-sensei. He yelled with joy, oh, yes, and youth, as he dropped the weights, which cratered the floor on impact, clouds of dust thrown high in the air. How much did those things weigh? Was the incredulous thought that ran through every mind present but two. One of these was Maida Guy, and the other his student. Then Lee vanished from view, incredibly, too fast to follow with the eye, and suddenly Naruto was launched skywards from a kick he did not anticipate hammering into his jaw from below. As he soared through the air, Lee was suddenly there again, driving him in another direction with a hefty kick to Naruto's gut. This was not good. Naruto channeled his chakra into his whisker marks, and tried to feel the wind, as he'd done in the forest against the Uru ninja, and was successful. It was of limited value, however, as Lee's speed was too great for him to do more than roll with the blow, reducing the actual injury. It was as the blue-eyed Jinchuriki sailed across the room, parallel to the floor, that he got some idea of how much trouble he was in, as Lee's bandages, that had been wrapped about the older boy's wrists, lashed around Naruto, trapping him for whatever was about to happen, and thus strapped together, they began to spiral towards the floor, picking up speed as they plunged towards the stone, with Lee jumping clear at the next to last second. Sensing Lee was clear, Naruto now felt no compunction in unleashing his bone metal, the spikes driving outwards, and sections of him simply plating over with it. His chakra recklessly poured into surviving, even as the floor cratered again, and dust from the impact hid the floor of the room. Lee appeared, panting, on the raised fingers of the shinobi statue. He was uncertain what was different about Naruto, but every time he'd kicked or punched the boy it had hurt, especially when the bone was close to the surface of the flesh. Lee ached all over, at every impact site, and he was exhausted. With the sole exception of the two Hyuga, who had their Byakugan active, no one could see through the dust, and while Hinata may have been reassured by what she saw, Neji's eyes were bulging far more than even the Hyuga bloodline limit could account for. Inside the settling dust, Naruto was slowly pulling in his bony spikes and plates. He was nearly running on fumes, and he didn't want too many people to see his Kekkei Genkai active yet. 1 more month, that was all he needed. Lee had really done a number on him. Naruto was hurting all along his skeleton, and although he knew he'd recover faster than anyone else, he also realized that his Psycho Katsuryoku was much, much slower when his chakra was depleted. He struggled to his feet as the dust dispersed, shocking Guy and Lee as he took hold of his head and stretched, one way then the other, each time causing a series of popping sounds. That's better, he said, bracing himself to continue. Shall we? Lee stared at Naruto. When he'd realized he'd just performed the primary lotus on a younger ninja, he had at first been alarmed, having responded more by muscle memory than by conscious decision. He'd been terrified that he'd killed his fellow Konoha genin. Now, the terrified feelings came from something else entirely. After that, Naruto stood up and wanted more. He looked across to Guy-sensei, who shook his head. Opening the gates would strain him further, and the damage would almost certainly take months to recover from, if he did. Standing, he spoke clearly. I see no benefit to continuing this fight, he announced. Proctor, I forfeit this match. Hayate shook his head. These were strange circumstances indeed. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto trudged up the stairs, a clue for those who knew him well, although Lee moved no faster. As he got closer to Hinata, he almost cringed beneath her loving gaze. I'm sorry if I worried you, he told her. I know, she replied, but we are shinobi. I don't ask that you stop going forth. I ask that you always come back to me. It's a promise, he declared. Believe it, she nodded and whispered. Always. Hinata Heim, he murmured. Hi, Naru-kun. I love you very much, he answered, but I'm going to fall over now. As he suited the deed to the word, she caught him, gathering him close as he slept, his head pillowed on her lap. Guy and Lee reassessed Naruto, again. The boy had been virtually running on the fumes of his chakra, and he'd bluffed Lee into a forfeit. This one was worth watching closely indeed. Inuzuka Kiba vs Nusuma Fukuro. Kiba was dismissive of his opponent as he and Akamaru strode from the bottom step to the middle of the room. Her white hair and dark eyes didn't register as measuring him at all. As she stopped, a good 15 feet from him, she was looking at Akamaru. Tugging her jumpsuit to be a little more comfortable, she adjusted the thick leather gauntlet that covered her right arm to the elbow, with its plated knuckles and open palm and fingers. So you work with a canine partner, that makes you an Inuzuka, and a male one, loud, opinionated, but loyal and focused. You might be a worthy foe, she said, calmly assessing him. Ha, Kiba barked. You know it, but this is a fight where you're outnumbered. While Akamaru and I work as one, there are two of us to the one of you. The Kumo girl gave a soft smile. She was not a delicate little thing like Suzume, but she was a pretty young kunoichi. Still, that smile. But Inuzuka-san, whoever said I was alone? She threw her arm out to one side, while making an odd call, one he'd occasionally heard at night, and a huge, white owl swooped silently down to land on Fukuro's gauntleted arm. This is Shiroheim, and I think you'll find 2-on-2 odds more than enough to deal with as you are. Hayate's call to begin set the stage, but with two to deal with, Kiba went straight to the big guns, pulling out a food pill and hurling it to Akamaru, even as Fukuro set Shiroheim to wing. The white owl was fast, intercepting the food pill and swallowing it herself. As Kiba gasped, he didn't know the bird could move that fast. Shiroheim returned to Fukuro as she spoke. Thank you Inuzuka-san, and I was told that male Inuzuka were terrible to their guests, she teased, as Kiba hurried to find another pill. Even as he found it, she was unleashing a very familiar, if somewhat modified technique. Twin soul clones. She called as Akamaru crunched it and swallowed the second pill, the backup Kiba had in case he needed it, as now. The figures that emerged from the smoke were a blend of the girl and the owl, white feathered wings spread high and wide, and they both launched into the air. Man-beast clones. Kiba cried as he and Akamaru used the Inuzuka version of the jutsu. Two somewhat canine Kibas now stood there and prepared their special move as something hit the floor in front of them, and burst into blinding light before either could look away. Blinded, unable to hear Fukuro or Shiroheim as they swooped in, neither was able to defend themselves against the silent aerial onslaught that left them trussed up like chickens in reams of ninja wire. Winner, Nusuma Fukuro declared the proctor. Even as Kiba struggled free of the wire, Akamaru just dispersing the jutsu freed himself that way, his partner barked at him, admiring their opponent's strength and teamwork. This Fukuro had, in a way, reminded him of his mother. Oh, Kami, he thought, recognizing a bigger, stronger version of what he'd felt towards Hinata. I'm in love. Akado Yoroi vs Tamari. Hajime, called Hayate, and a massive gale-force typhoon smashed past him, driving the Konoha shinobi a good foot into the wall behind him before he fell forward, collapsing as the wind from the Suna Kunoichi's fan dispersed. Winner, Tamari Tsurugi Masumi vs Tamaishi Tobu. Tamaishi may have looked a virtual clone of his teammate Koshi, but where his friend preferred a sturdy defense, Tobu was an artillery piece, favoring the long-range jutsu. So when Masumi jumped back to gain the distance to use his own technique, dislocating and stretching his limbs, the Iwa ninja was already making hand seals. Flying avalanche jutsu. A number of rocks tore their way through the floor and whistled as they flew through the air towards the hapless shinobi opposing Tobu. All his flexibility helped little against a torrent of stone pinning you down and dropping rocks on your skull. Winner Tamaishi Tobu. Hayate was very impressed. Masumi was just pressed. Yamanaka Ino vs Ginkumo Kura. Ino took her place on the atrium floor after a few repairs had been made, and faced her opponent, a short, slender man with a number of kunai in hand, who actually crouched, balanced, on a kunai heat embedded in the floor. His eyes were never at rest, constantly in motion, and she recognized that expression on his face of boredom. This was a strategist like Shikamaru. This would not be easy. As the fight began, she remembered her new sensei's advice. If they know your name, he'd said, then they have a good chance of knowing what you can do with it. So do something else, something they won't expect, to buy yourself time. It does take time to make that focusing seal the Yamanaka jutsu require, so cut it to the bone. And she had, training so that her seal was faster than she'd ever dreamed possible. She'd vowed to herself a new goal, to master her clan jutsu until she didn't need the seals, something even her father could not do. Her opponent spoke. I'm sorry, he said. What? I'm sorry, he repeated, and expanded on his apology. That you've already lost, I mean. Just luck of the draw, I guess. Ino's face flushed red with anger as she stood waiting for the proctor's call. When it finally came, she whipped her hands up to make the hand seal and Kura's voice broke through her concentration as she did. Tsuchi no Kuni's mines produce some of the best ninja wire, he said as his kunai swooshed past her in a wide pattern, and he waved his hands in a complex pattern. So what? Ino snapped, as she brought her hands up once more, only to find herself unable to bring them together. Raising her eyes to see her opponent, she saw the metal rings decorating his gloves, and the wires that connected to them. I thought you'd appreciate being beaten by the best, he answered as he hauled both hands upwards, tightening the wires and dragging his opponent to the floor, unable to move. Kumojutsu. Cat's Cradle. Haruno Sakura vs Daraseki Otome. Hayate glanced from the girl with pink hair, to the other, who looked almost albino, if it weren't for her pure jet black eyes. As he called, Hajime, and jumped back, the two girls took their stances, with Sakura in the basic Konoha Academy style, and the Aiwa girl in a loose stance with fists high beside her head, standing on the balls of her feet, swaying a little from foot to foot. Despite her petite stature, Otome was considered the most dangerous member of her team, second to Ishiguma-sensei, of course. His stone bear style made him a virtual juggernaut, and was credited for his survival against the Yondaime. He'd admittedly spent a lot of time hospitalized, but he did live. In her case, it was her Kekkei Genkei, the Ishi no Haifu, the skin of stone. She was almost impervious to conventional attacks, but unfortunately, paid for it with no real sense of touch. She could vaguely feel pressure, but she had to spend her entire waking life constantly paying attention to her every action. Sakura knew nothing of the Marble Maiden of Aiwa, the adopted child of the stone bear. But she did know her own abilities, and after what she'd seen today, was wondering if she was really ready for this. She'd entered the exams and done her best, mostly to support Sasuke-kun, the assistance she'd given Naruto notwithstanding. He hadn't really been annoying for the past few years, and he seemed really happy to be with Hinata-chan. Still, Sakura wasn't going to stop without giving it her all, and maybe Sasuke would notice her. She struck fast, her fist blurring in a strike that would come in under the girl's guard and Sakura found herself on the floor with a burning ache in the side of her face. The Aiwa Kunoichi had dropped her elbow into Sakura's fist, bouncing the strike off course, and her fist had driven into the opening, and that's where everything went white. As the pink-haired girl rose shakily, her opponent glared at her. Otome was not happy. That had been too easy. Even if she was her team's taijutsu specialist, the Konoha girl should have been able to do something, but at the last second her gaze had flicked to one side and back, gah. Her opponent was crushing on someone who was present. Otome could not stop herself from speaking. Sakura, yes. At the other girl's nod, after she'd spat out some blood, the Aiwa Kunoichi continued. Your eyes are on the summit, but your feet must tread the path. Why do you fall? Sakura heard the words, and a puzzled look crossed her face. She took her stance once more, and the white-skinned Aiwa sighed, taking her own. One more, then. This time, Sakura was more focused, but it didn't help overly. She saw exactly what happened this time, as she thrust a fist at her opponent's face, only for Otome to slap it aside with her hand, and continue spiraling in, her elbow connecting with Sakura's jaw. The bright side was, now both sides of her face matched. Her last try was a kick, lashing out towards Otome's midsection, but the marble maiden's rising knee swept up to prevent it, and the rest of her leg extended straight up, so that her two legs made almost a straight line up and down, as the smaller girl brought her leg down in a crashing blow, like driving an axe through wood. It was a devastating attack, even had Otome not had her Kekkei Genkai, and the cracks as Sakura's collarbone broke, along with the forearm she'd raised in a frantic and off-balance attempt to block, were clearly audible. To Sakura's surprise, she could hear Otome curse. "Sorry, I think I overdid it a little," she said. "No sense of touch, sometimes I misjudge the force I'm using." Sakura could feel herself passing out, and gasped a last question before she did. "Wait, what did you mean about the summit and the path?" "Think about it," Otome answered, "and it will come to you." The last thing Sakura heard before losing her hold on the waking world was Hayate calling out. "Winner! Cough cough Daraseki Otome." The medics had carried Sakura away minutes before, and the 13 genin remaining were standing before the statue once more. By some coincidence or design, each had at least one teammate nearby, and 3 complete teams had made it to the third exams tournament stage. As Hiruzen stood before them and cast a measuring gaze upon them, he was surprised to a degree. He'd been certain that Naruto would have made it this far, but for his teammates to do so as well, was an unexpected bonus. If there was a downside to the results, it would be that so few Konoha ninja made it this far, but he was content that those who stood here were the best genin available. "The 13 of you who stand here are the very pinnacle of shinobi," he said, with no preamble before his speech. Why waste the time? After he was done here, he was going to have to listen to the civilians on the council whine about the Uchihas, unfair treatment, how someone must have cheated to pull that match, or drugged their golden boy. They wouldn't understand the corruptive influence of that curse mark. Dragging his mind away from Sasuke's dilemma, he went on. "As a result, you will be set against each other in the tournament in 1 month's time. This delay serves a dual purpose. First, it allows those important persons and officials who wish to attend time to arrive. They can see for themselves the quality of shinobi they are hiring for their tasks. The second reason, and far more relevant to yourselves, is that it allows you time to train and develop new techniques, or master old ones. As each of you has seen the others fight, with a few exceptions, here he thought of Naruto after his fight with Rock Lee, so you know something of your opponents. Now is the time for you to find something to surprise them, to show others that you are not stagnant and idle, but truly ready for the responsibilities that come with being Chunin. Your sensei await you, and I wish you good training." Dismissed. As the Hokage swept from the room, the ninja who were left found their way to their sensei and those teammates who hadn't needed medical attention or specialist assistance. Of those who had not advanced, Kiba was looking particularly lost, and his gaze kept slipping towards the Kumo team, who had all made the tournament. Or rather, towards one particular member thereof. Hinata spotted the signs, and smiled. The poor boy was smitten, and had no idea how to deal with it. On top of that, one of his teammates was hospitalized, and the other was having his curse mark contained, if that was a manageable goal. He couldn't even turn to his sensei. A glance at Naruto, a nod, and she walked up to their Inuzuka friend. "Kiba, we were going to go to Ichiraku's for ramen to celebrate our team making it this far. Would you like to join us, you and Akamaru?" she asked politely. Kiba looked up at her, and shook his head. "Nah, I've got some deep and heavy thinking ahead, some stuff I may even have to ask my ma about. I wouldn't be very good company, anyway. Tell you what, next time." He paused. He didn't want to say the words, "my treat," because Naruto could literally eat his way through Kiba's savings easily. It was like saying, "all you can eat," to Choji. Quote. "I'll buy you guys a bowl." That said, he drifted away. Before anyone had the chance to leave, Gecko Hayate stepped up to the front of the dais, with a whiteboard set up and a box with a hole in the top that rattled. "If I could get your attention, please, those who will be part of the tournament. In this box are a number of white balls with numbers from 1 to 13. As each of you draws one, your name goes next to that number and the next person draws. In this way we learn exactly who each of you will be facing in the first round of the tournament. The way things are arranged, one of you gets a free pass to the second round, and another, different person gets a pass to the third. Then the last two will face each other. Please bear in mind that all aspects of your performance will be judged, not just where you finish. There may be multiple chunin, or none. Even those who have already been eliminated may yet be selected to be promoted, should their reports reflect them as deserving such a distinction. One by one, they drew out the numbers, and each name was slotted into place on the board. Tenten was the lucky one who drew 13, and received a pass in the first round, while Neji received the number 10. The Kumo team stepped forward next to draw, with Kura getting the 5, Suzume the 12 and Fukuro drew the 8. Then Otome and Tobu drew the 4 and 2 respectively, and it was Team 8's turn to draw. Shino looked at the ball in his hand. The 7. Hinata was nervous as Naruto drew the 3, and when she reached for her own, received the 9. When the Suna ninja received their numbers, Tamari got the 6, Konkuro the 11, and Gaara received the 1. A few moments later, the lineups were completed. The match is set. Hayate looked over the genin before him. Now that we know who will be facing who, each of you should discuss your training for the next month with your sensei. Since you will be unavailable for missions or legal issues, unless you commit a crime, you will each receive pay as though for an ongoing C-rank mission. Good luck to you all. Kurenai was looking carefully at her genin, running things over in her mind. Their skills, as had been displayed in the preliminaries, were incredible, easily chunin level, and Hinata's victory in particular had caused ripples in the Hyuga clan. This gentle storm she had developed was a devastatingly effective extension of the Hyuga techniques, but it was in a direction that most of the clan couldn't wield, so they would try to deny it. Talk about cutting off their nose to spite their face. She needed people who could teach her genin, who could help them reach the next level. Shino's father had delivered a message from his grandfather, acknowledging certain strides the young man had made in integrating his lightning chakra with his colony, and offering the youth a second colony, something only offered those the Aburame believed special, elite, and above all, capable. She certainly wasn't going to hold him back on that count. Naruto's teacher should have been an easy choice, but after the fight she'd seen, she had to wonder if there was anyone she knew short of a Sannin who could advance his skills, and Naruto had already encountered all three of those. In fact, maybe she should ask them. It had struck her for a moment as she pondered his fight with Lee, trying to spot a flaw in the whole thing that needed to be addressed, that she blanked as she realized, while Lee had removed his weights. Naruto had not. As for Hinata, the Hyuga would already have laid out a demand for their most accomplished warrior, Hiyashi himself, to help with Neji's training, and the man would comply, and he himself could not assist Hinata with her unique style, based off the same Hyuga style, but apparently far more dangerous. She needed someone with a lightning affinity to help her integrate it, and also someone who could help a newly developing style grow. Her best choice would be to contact Jiraiya for his aid, and let him take it from there, but first. Shinshi-kun, I have a tiny favor to ask of you. In return, I'll help your team with dealing with genjutsu. A man in a gray cloak, embroidered with a crane, and a wide hat, sat at the bar, nursing his sake. It didn't take long before he was joined by two others, a stocky man whose red cloak bore a willow tree and an older man, limping a little, bearing a peacock on his blue cloak. This one carried a bag beside him, and placed it on a stool next to them as he waved over a sake for himself. He measures up then? The crane-cloaked one asked. Of course, the willow wearer stated. You remember Sarutobi Asuma, yes. He was assigned to Asuma's team as a Chunin assistant, and was so efficient at keeping them improving themselves that it became a habit. He even had Shikaku's boy doing sit-ups while he watched the clouds, if you can believe it. The peacock-clad man nodded. He even brought his team to be outfitted anew at my store as a form of consolation prize, he admitted. The youngest gentleman has done all that we have. He just needs to really show what he's capable of in a life or death situation. We're agreed, then. They each nodded, and then parted ways. It soon spread, it was official. The three gentlemen had accepted a fourth. Let me get this straight, the blonde woman spoke harshly with her old friend. You want me To go back to the village that claimed the lives of my brother and my fiancé, in order to train to kids who have a huge potential, one of which we know already, the other is a girl starting up her own style branching off from her family's, in order that they can take up the dream my loved ones died for, that killed Minato and Kushina, all because they deserve better than what the council would let them have or relegate them to. Jiraiya cringed as she put it that way. When you say it like that it sounds so bad. I'm sorry, I'll have to make other arrangements. The fist that wrapped itself in his kimono front and hauled him to her face had no business being so strong while not looking it. Ooh, no, you don't, she hissed at him. I wasn't saying no, I was just making sure I understood. Uzumaki versus impossible. My money's on Uzumaki, it's the only time I win without a disaster waiting in the wings. Greetings, Uzumaki-sama, Hyuga-sama, the well-built bald man with the goatee said, his dark glasses hiding his eyes in his new green cloak, decorated with a tiger, billowing in the breeze. I am Sodetora Shinshi, the gentleman tiger. I am here to assist the two of you with elemental integration, and learning the lightning element. He turned to Naruto. Sadly, I can help little with the fire element, I have only earth, wind and lightning. But what I teach, you will learn. Naruto and Hinata exchanged a glance as the older shinobi took out a scroll and a brush. The first step would be to increase the effectiveness of your weight training. Now this is a gravity seal with a factor of 2. In the Hyuga compound, Hiyashi worked with Neji, giving the young man a solid and unbreakable grip on the foundations of the gentle fist, while his nephew's teammate was trained in no small way by her adopted father. He was starting to wonder about them, though, as they would disappear together in the afternoons, to reappear much later, flushed and sweating, almost exhausted. There were a few other activities he could imagine that would have two teenagers in such a state, he was certain, but for some reason, he couldn't think of any off the top of his head. They seemed to enjoy that time, he supposed, and he would like Neji to be happy, but perhaps next time he should follow them, just to make sure they knew what they were getting into. Sasuke glared in the mirror. A third ring of seals had been inked into place around this curse mark, apparently meant to seal it away. They wouldn't work. They hadn't worked the first time, and those seals had been set by a master, the Sannin called Jiraiya. In the entire history of Konoha, only 2 others had surpassed him with Fuinjutsu, and neither of those were alive. It was an odd trio that presented themselves in the Hokage's office. The blonde looked to be in her mid-30s at the oldest, the brunette carrying the pig was in her 20s, and the white-haired old man was easily in his 50s or 60s. All 3 carried themselves like shinobi, and all 3 bowed low. As requested, Hokage-sensei, we are here to assist in the training of Uzumaki Naruto. Sarutobi Hiruzen smiled a genuine smile, something that, apart from occasional cameos on his face at some amusing thing Naruto had managed, had been absent from his expressions for far too long. Welcome home, Tsunade-san. So Naruto was all it took to get you home then. I wish I'd known this earlier, I'd have had him write to you, as soon as I taught him to write. He rose and came around the desk to hug his former student. You have really been gone far too long. Let me tell you what that boy has done so far, especially his mission to Nami no Kuni, and how well he's done in the Chunin exams. Tsunade went pale as she remembered the exact words on a very old bet she'd had with Naruto. Chunin exams. He's in line to be a Chunin, now, is he? Her gaze drifted to Jiraiya, who nervously cleared his throat. I knew something had slipped my mind, he said. Apparently he's done quite well, a very strong young man, and that's why he and his fiancée need your training. Too late, the Toad Sage knew he'd just slipped up again. Fiancé. Dear Jiraiya-san, please do tell me how a young boy gets engaged and you forget to tell me about it. Tsunade's voice ran up and down from growls to purrs, and Jiraiya felt the deep subconscious beast within him and all men crawl under his metaphorical bed and hide, muttering, "You're on your own," over and over. Coming clean sounded like a very good idea. Shimura Danzo was not a happy man, less so now that the Uchiha was out of the running for the tournament. Looking around the table at the other counselors, he opened his mouth, only to be cut off by the Hokage. Not a word, Danzo, Hiruzen almost snarled, with such venom even his old teammates were taken aback. With the migraine masquerading as a Chunin exams that you insisted Hitaki Kakashi nominate his team for, if you say one word about his not being given a fair chance, I will, by the 1001 kami, nail you to this table and let Ibiki and Inoichi at you. The council was silent, although most of the shinobi half of the council was impressed. The Yamanaka head even looked over at Danzo, almost a challenge in itself. Go ahead, that look seemed to say, I dare you. And I will enjoy ripping your secrets from your mind. Danzo, quite prudently, remained silent. Hiruzen glared at the agenda for today's meeting. HMPH. Let's see what you have in your heads today. First item, the obvious railroading of the preliminaries and the defrauding of Uchiha Sasuke of his place in the tournament. Hiruzen looked over at the civilian side of the council. You do realize you have no jurisdiction over military decisions, right? That you could be charged for even attempting it. At the nervous glances, he saw that they weren't reading the laws they were trying to use against him properly. Someone had given them that most dangerous of things, a little information. Clearing his throat, he spoke. First item denied. As Danzo opened his mouth to protest, Hiruzen pointed at him. Not one word. All meeting, or else. Turning the page, Hiruzen continued. Application to invoke the Clan Registration Act, on behalf of Uzumaki Naruto, whose signature is not affixed, and the potential brides. Aren't these the very girls who used to spit on him before his abduction? You've failed to include his current fiancée, and another thing that you've missed. Here he smirked. He is currently enlisted in the Chunin exams, and stands a good chance of promotion. His finger was pointing at Danzo before the old warhawk could even think of opening his mouth this time, although Haruno Mebuki stood in protest. Uzumaki-sama has Kekkei Genkei that are valuable to Konoha. It is imperative that such not be lost through random blending with other bloodlines, and as the boy in question is not yet of age, and as a genin, he falls under civilian jurisdiction for this purpose. Her lecture was piercing, and Inuzuka Sume was holding her ears by the end of the declamation. Hyuga Hiyashi raised his hand. Hokage-sama, if I may. At Hiruzen's wave of invitation, he stood. Mebuki-san, you are operating with a flawed premise. Uzumaki Naruto is under consideration for promotion to Chunin, a state that carries with it legal majority, as such ninja have proven themselves to deserve it. Since he is within such consideration as part of the Chunin exams, he is currently beyond all legal actions until his status is resolved, save those that apply to criminal activity against Konoha. Should he, as is likely, achieve the rank of Chunin, he will then have the right to declare or deny this CRA for himself. Introducing this in such a manner is thus illegal, although I am sure Hokage-sama can forgive such a thing, once. It was a much paler Mebuki who dropped into her seat, and glared in Danzu's direction, as Hiruzen made another announcement. Second item, denied. Third item, he turned another page. This meeting, he was beginning to agree with the Nara clan, so troublesome. The Kumo genin occupied a tree set a small distance from the walls of the Hyuga estate, looking towards that compound. Their guards are good, no openings there, Kura said to his teammates. Going over the wall won't work, and the girl is too well protected on her way to and from their academy. This is a strategic nightmare. The luck of the draw, I guess. Suzume slapped him with her sketchbook, before returning to her landscape of the area. You know I hate that phrase, Kura ni, she told her surrogate, big brother, never mind the fact that she was older than he. What about that house? Kura shook his head. Hardly. That Uzumaki lives there, and we all saw him fight. Could any of us have taken that hit and just shaken it off like that? Bad strategy to tick off someone that good. Suzume nodded absently. This is a terrible idea, too, Raikage's orders are not. The target he ordered is the sister of that Hyuga girl from the first preliminary, you saw what she did. I'm starting to doubt our Kage's sanity. What do you think, Fukuro-chan? She looked back at her sister. They weren't related, any of them, except by circumstance, all being orphans taken in by the goodness of Kumogakure no Sato's collective heart. And if you believe that, she had a bridge in Nami she wanted to sell you. While Kura's last name was now kind of cool, it hadn't been that long ago that it had been the same as theirs. Nusuma. Stolen. A dead giveaway. Her sister in all but blood, however, was not paying attention. She was instead staring dreamily in completely the wrong direction, towards a young man with scruffy black hair and a small white dog. Fukuro realized slowly that her team wanted something from her. If they build them like him, this place can't be all that bad, can it? The giggles of Suzume told her that answer had nothing to do with her question. Kura rolled his eyes. Enough Rakan, time for practice. Another axe half shattered in the pale girl's grip as her sensei coached her. She was getting better, she knew, but still she sighed as she cast it aside. I don't think weapons are the answer, Ishiguma-sensei. She corrected herself at his glare. To-san, sorry. Indeed not. The voice of her adoptive father, the stone bear of Iowa, was like someone trying to gargle gravel. But it has given you the control you need for the Dream Breaker Jutsu. Now, gather your chakra, so. Naruto stared at Jiraiya. When Tsunade-sama had arrived, and offered to help train Hinata, he'd taken it as a godsend, and Jiraiya's offer to teach him at the same time was almost as welcome. The two of them had learned much from Shinshi, but he had his own team to teach, and while Kurenai could help them with genjutsu and breaking them, Naruto was unlikely to be able to use such. He was even excited to hear about the whole summons contract concept. But this, you want me to summon toads and frogs? He asked, to be sure he'd heard correctly. Yeah, it'll be great, the old man said, caught up in the thought, your dad could do it, I taught him how, and now you, too, can hold the Toad Mountain contract. Naruto shrugged off the feelings of pride about his dad, as he needed more reasons to be proud of him, and crossed his arms. So you want me to summon creatures that would see my teammate as a snack? You do recall that Shino's an Aburame, right? The look on the old Sanin's face informed Naruto that Jiraiya had indeed forgotten. What other summons are there? Kakashi has the Dog Plains contract, Tsunade and Shizune the Slug Marsh, that Enko girl has the Serpent River, and the Hokage has the Monkey Jungle one. There are others, but those are the main ones. Jiraiya shook his head. I've even heard rumors that the female Aburame have been keeping the Mantis Ridge contract hidden. Is there a Fox contract? Jiraiya's eyebrow rose. Not that I know of, kid, he replied. I suppose if you had a powerful enough creature, you could make one, but you also have to find the associated location for the creatures you summon, and that goes in the contract's name. If a contract's signatories all die, then the next person to summon that creature has to start from scratch. Naruto thought hard as he ruminated on Jiraiya's words. So what should I learn in the meantime? He asked. I've got 3 weeks and as many shadow clones as I can make, so let me see what you can teach me. Hinata stared as the fish flopped and thrashed, and Shizune threw the poor thing back into the water. Whoa, the older Kunoichi said as the magnitude of what she'd witnessed sank in. I didn't get it down that fast. Tsunade, maybe we should recruit some Hyuga for the Medi Nin Corps. The medic of the Sanin nodded. Hinata may not have had huge reserves of power, but she did have superlative chakra control, and the Byakugan was a major benefit to the things she was learning. Add in the gentle storm style she was developing. Naruto was just lucky he was already engaged to her, because once her abilities became known, the poor girl would have been part of some bidding war to gain her as a bride to improve her own or another's clan. Yamanaka Inoichi slugged back the bottle of sake, much to the surprise of his friends. As Shikaku and Shuza stared, the blonde Jonin gestured for 2 more. Hinata and Naruto came in for therapy today, he said. After the bottle, he was feeling a little buzzed, but he was still far too sober for his own liking. I was there to do the assessment to see if my wife could look through their minds without running into S-class secrets. Hinata's mind isn't too bad, just nightmares of failing Naruto. Hiyashi's attitude while growing up, she's seen worse. But Naruto. The sake arrived and he slugged back another, before pouring from the 3rd bottle. I won't. I can't in good conscience let another wade through what I encountered in that poor young man's head. Shikaku caught the way his friend spoke of the 13-year-old, who was no doubt training hard at that very moment. He remembers the experiments they did on him, you know. He has a terror that they'll come for him, or worse, as far as he's concerned, for Hinata. And that was bad enough, but the way he lived, the way he was treated, before he was abducted. Quote. More sake disappeared into the mind walker's belly. His passenger is in there, too, fully aware, and that one enjoys scaring the spit out of people. He even gave me a guided tour of Naruto's mind, including the things our own children did. You two can be proud of your boys, but Ino. I have to talk with Ino. He pushed away from the bar and left, shaking a little, but otherwise stone cold sober. Something he should not have been, having consumed as much sake as he had. As they stood before the gates of the stadium, Team 8 glanced at each other. The gates slowly swung open and they stepped forward, into a future they were making for themselves, and seizing with their own hands. Just in. Community. Forum. More. Project Naruto. Shinobi X by Contramancer. Anime Naruto rated M. English, Adventure and Romance, Naruto U. Hinata H. Words. 126k plus. Faves. 1k plus. Follows. 1k plus. Published. May 20, 2013 updated. June 28, 2013 639 Chapter 14. Seal 14. Content. Project Naruto. Shinobi X. Disclaimer. I do not own the Naruto world or characters. Those are the property of Masashi Kishimoto. The challenge I answer here is from Devil ZX Knight 86, with all due credit for the basic concept. It's all fun and games until someone loses then it's a party. 14th Seal. Content. Ino sat in the stands with her parents, gazing out at the assembled hopefuls and listening to the gossip below. 2 weeks ago, her father had asked her permission to examine certain memories, so that he had the context for the actions she'd taken. Puzzled, she'd hitchhiked with him as he plunged into her mind, and looked closely at everything she'd ever done or said to Naruto. She'd wondered why, as she saw the past rise up once more, and seen exactly what she'd done, how she'd slapped down any attempt at friendship by this dirty, badly clad orphan. What ninja wears orange unless they're a fool or decoy? She'd seen the other kids do worse than taunt, she'd seen the bruised and battered Naruto, and once she'd even witnessed the beating he took because he wouldn't give that bully from the basic school his real name, instead calling him Hajime, under the logic, well, you're always starting fights. She was not proud of her past self, nor was she looking forward to the lecture she was certain that she'd receive from her father, one she felt she actually deserved, and what teenage girl ever thinks that? Then her father found something she'd suppressed, an almost forgotten memory from years ago. She'd found a really badly beaten Naruto in the park, where he'd been left by whoever beat him, with a welt on his forehead from an adult's hand, as that Hyuga girl, Hinata, was dragged away by an insensitive carer, if such an oxymoron could exist. The bullies had left, laughing, and she'd wanted to avoid the boy, but she'd heard his belly growl loudly. One rice ball, one single, solitary morsel, that she'd been saving as a treat for herself for the walk home. Yet when she saw this boy, having heard the Hyuga girl's words, she left it for him instead, not understanding why. She wasn't sure why even now, years after the event. So she retreated from her own mind, and opened her eyes. Her father's sudden embrace was shocking, she was expecting a lecture, deserved one in her own eyes, yet for some reason, that one memory, that single rice ball, had affected her normally cheerfully stoic father, like this. She had barely made out his voice as he spoke. I have seen Naruto's side of these events, too, he'd whispered. I'm not happy with your behavior. But that rice ball, he never knew who left it for him, but he remembered it. You didn't give it to him to get anything, there was no possible gain for you. You left it because it was the right thing to do. That makes me proud of you. The stands rang with the noise of the crowd, and she pushed her introspection away to watch her former classmates perform. In the arena, a good 20 feet below the stands, the sickly proctor stood side by side with his assistants, a woman with long purple hair and a man with a long grass stem in his mouth. All three wore swords, and Gecko Hayate stepped forward holding out the sheet that had the matchups arrayed on it. Take a quick look at this, he said, and refresh your memory on who your first fight is against. Those of you not in the first match are to go up the stairs behind that door. Here he pointed to a doorway in the walls of the stadium, to the waiting area for the contestants. As the participants not fighting moved quickly from the field, Hiruzen looked over to the cage on the next throne over. At least, he thought it was the cage, he couldn't be certain with that veil over the man's face, and he himself had never met the man, so why did he seem so familiar? Your son is in the first match, I see, he said, attempting to draw the man into conversation. That is not my son, the cage said in an indistinct voice. I do pity the Iowa boy's bad luck. Quietly and furiously, the man behind the mask had other thoughts. I hope that Gaara's bloodthirst doesn't go too far, that could ruin the whole plan. 1. Sabaku no Gaara vs 2. Tamaishi Tobu. Tobu knew what he was getting into in this match. He'd seen the reports of aftermaths where Gaara had been involved against Iowa ninja. They weren't pretty. Still, he felt he was tougher and stronger than most. He should have a chance, particularly with his facility with Earth Jutsu. As he took his stance, the one called Gaara simply stood there, his arms crossed. The hail of stones from Tobu's first jutsu, intended to test the waters, so to speak, were slapped aside contemptuously by tendrils of sand that sprang up from the ground, sand that was even now slowly pouring from the gourd on the other boy's back. Gaara was measuring the heavily muscled young man in the white outfit. The rocks were mildly interesting, and the wave of dirt that he shockwaved towards Gaara stopped dead when it hit a counter wave of sand. This was boring, and Mother cried out for blood. Tobu stepped up, right at the edge of Gaara's sand, his hands flickering through an array of hand seals before he plunged them into the sand. Doden. Terrain domination, he cried out as he unleashed the chakra to make this sand answer to his will instead of his foes. It came as a great surprise, therefore, as the sand did not release his hands when he tried to stand, but instead held him firm, beginning to spiral up his arms and cover him as Gaara finally lifted one hand towards him. Sand coffin, came the harsh whisper, and Tobu's heart dropped in his chest. He could guess what came next, and the last thing he saw was his friend Koshi, in the stand screaming Tobu's name, as the sand covered his face. Sand burial. As the sand covering the larger genin turned red with a terrible sound, Gaara sighed with an expression suspiciously like relief, and Tamari relaxed a little. The plan was still good. Gaara had just taken the edge off his bloodlust, and it wasn't like Iowa could hate him anymore. Otome watched what was left of her teammate drip slowly through the sand, and as Gaara pulled the blood-soaked sand back to his gourd, releasing the crushed and ruined thing that had once been Tobu, a young man filled with laughter and knowledge, she wondered why she still couldn't cry. She could sorrow, she could mourn, but no tears ever came. Recalling the match-ups, she quirked one corner of her mouth upward, while her brow settled in a grim demeanor. She simply had to win her next match, and she could drag her friend's equivalent value from this Gaara's flesh. 3. Uzumaki Naruto vs 4. Daraseki Otome. Otome walked slowly to the center of the field, taking up her stance and freezing in place. Today's events were such that Chu-san, Ishiguma-sensei, had provided her with a new outfit, one in a flattering blue, with leggings and sleeveless jacket. The kanji for bear, written in black on her back loudly proclaimed his pride for her. Her sensei, her father, watched from the stands high above, smiled, and turned to regard the poor fool who'd been pitted against her. As the young genin stepped from the shadows of the doorway he froze. It couldn't be, he was too young and the man who'd taken his eye was dead for at least 13 years now. It struck him that this must be the son of that man, the legacy of the Yondaime Hokage, the Yellow Flash. Naruto had deliberately chosen his outfit for today with care, and some advice from his Hinata Hime. The pants and jacket were, as always, orange, but striped across the legs and arms in black. He wore a coat, like he remembered from that echo of his father, seen so long ago, almost 4 years now, but this coat was black, with orange flames about the hem, and the lack of sleeves revealed his jacket's crests, the white spiral on his left shoulder and the red spiral on his right. Beneath the coat, seen occasionally as it snapped and billowed around him, the character for Fukutsu, or fortitude, was prominently displayed in midnight blue over his heart. From a strap across his chest, a large scroll nestled on his back. All 3 members of Team 8 had one, and each was different. His and Hinata's looked new. He took his own stance, feet wide, body low, arms forward with the backs of his fists toward the ground and about level with his shoulders, and waited, an almost feral grin of anticipation on his face. This should be interesting, Hajime called Hayate, and the fight began, Otome moving towards Naruto in a veritable maelstrom of fists, feet, elbows and knees, a blizzard of strikes that he was hard put to fend off. Yet he did. A strike that should have taken off his head slid along his jaw with no real contact, a knee to his ribs instead fell short as he moved. Then she saw it, a fraction of a second with an opening as she spun around his arms, pushing his fists in that direction and drove her elbow into his neck at the base of the skull with truly punishing force, hearing a metallic ratcheting noise as her opponent cartwheeled over to crash down on his back, and disappear in a puff of white smoke. She snarled, but she was impressed. She'd just given him a crash course in her fighting style, at minimal cost, and now he knew about the deceptively vicious reverse elbow. To make things even more interesting, her elbow was throbbing, he was. Wait, my elbow is throbbing. But I never feel anything. Her eyes unwillingly drifted to her arm as she worked her stony fingers about the joint. She could feel the pressure she was causing, but little more, until she brushed against the point of impact. The sudden sensation had her hissing, a sharp, indrawn breath. That actually hurt. Whatever he was made of, this fight was now something she could really enjoy. This boy could make her feel, if she could find him. There he was, on that branch, the one that bowed a little in a manner she found familiar, a hint that the person on the branch was far heavier than they looked. As she watched, he bit his thumb and reached inside his jacket to swipe at something on his chest. Fuinjutsu. Go Juryoku Fuji, release. He called out, and stepped from the branch, which snapped upwards to the nearly vertical once relieved of its burden. As he hit the ground, she was already in motion, her barrage of attacks overwhelming in number, for anyone else. Naruto felt much lighter with the 5 gravity seal released, although according to Shinshi, this being one of the 2 seals the gentleman tiger had managed to teach him and Hinata, the other being far less practical in combat, all he had to do was wipe off the blood and run chakra through the seal once more to restore it. As the Aiwa Kunoichi came in, he saw the pattern his shadow clone had been hard pressed against, and countered it, hammering each of her strikes with a striking surface of his own, plated with bone metal. She was feeling those, they were hurting her, he could tell, so why was she smelling ever more eager for this fight? Ishiguma Daikenshi watched from the stands. Were it not for the reserve the stone bear style had inculcated in him, he would have been beside himself, without using any bunshin techniques. His daughter was having the fight of her life down there, and feeling it, the pain was obvious in her face. The fact that she was feeling it had him worried. Having found pain, would she seek out more? Or would she seek out other feelings? All he could do was be there, and pray. Breaking away as Naruto struck a counter blow at the moment she spun for the reverse elbow, driving her to one knee which she turned into a roll as she tumbled forwards to reach a standing position, and spinning to face her foe, she saw him charging towards her, and channeled chakra into her body for the stone bear techniques Ishiguma had drilled her in. The first stage was easy, to her anyway, the hardened body of stone bear, the second was less so, pouring the chakra through the muscles instead of the chakra coils. To anyone who hadn't mastered the first step, this could tear their muscles from the very bones, but if you had, you instead increased your strength immensely with the iron bear. She absently tore a nearby tree from the ground and swung it at her blue-eyed foe. When Naruto saw her tear the tree from the ground like she was picking a daisy, he hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but she swung the tree at him and he had a split second to counter. As his claws shot out of his forearms, he was already channeling wind chakra into them, and he struck at the tree, screaming out, K's no Sum. Claws of the wind. As he did, the results were twofold, both halting the tree's swing and severing the upper half from the trunk, sending it crashing to the ground, even as the crowd began to roar with applause at the fight unfolding here. Raising his arms before him, crossed over his chest, Naruto grinned at his opponent, who was debating whether or not her current techniques were good enough. Channeling lightning chakra into the claws at the same time as his wind chakra was a little tricky, but the hum that started to emerge from them as the girl's eyes widened was ominous. She released a storage scroll at her hip and caught the Zanbeitu, the horse-killing sword, that emerged. Raising it with both hands, she shouted, a wordless yell of challenge, and charged. To Naruto, it was close to slow motion, as he swept his claws to cross, intercepting her descending sword, designed to cleave through a horse in a single blow, armored or not, in a manner similar to the way he'd done against Zabuza. This time, though, He knew what he was doing, and how, thanks to Shinshi-san, and wasn't about to pass out. He roared, Arashi no Sume. And the hum of his claws intensified, and the Kumo ninja stared as they recognized the sound of Raiden pouring through a blade as Naruto's claws sliced through the tempered steel with all the resistance of water, and hammering his forehead against the Iowa girl's Hitai-8, driving her from her feet, before releasing his grip on his chakra and sheathing his claws. Ishiguma landed in the arena, staring down at his unconscious daughter. This Uzumaki. Didn't the Flash have that redhead girlfriend with that name? This was making more and more sense. He gathered his child and student up, her soft flesh dimpling. The stone bear of Iowa paused. Otome's skin was now soft and pink, and he glanced up at the boy, no, the ninja, who'd given her the fight of her life, who shrugged. Wondering at the miracle, he decided to speak with Koshi. Iowa would not learn of this young man through them. Naruto returned to the participants' seats, claiming the one next to Hinata, as he redid his gravity seal. He answered Hinata's questioning look with a smile. That style had almost no openings, he explained, and I didn't think anyone made of stone could be that fast. It was constant offense. I wonder if Lee could use it. The announcement of the next match drew their attention back to the stadium floor. 5. Sabaku no Tamari vs 6. Ginkumo Kura. Kura had, like so many others, been somewhat gobsmacked by the fight between the two previous genin. He didn't let it overwhelm him though, just gave his thanks that he hadn't been the unlucky number 4. As he skated down the wall on his chakra, a skill he'd discovered himself from the tree climbing exercise, it was a simple matter of cycling the chakra, letting it pull you along, and what he did now was a slightly reversed version. With his chakra used to slow his descent, his mind raced on 5 different paths. The first part, the quietest, was analyzing the previous battle. The second, a little louder, was running through the known tactics of his opponent and possible counters. A wind user was seriously challenging, she could deflect his weapons virtually at will, and was good at maintaining mid to long range distances. Third, he was pondering over a mystery that had come to light very recently. Occasionally, they lost their sensei. He would disappear, and be gone for a few hours. Was Sagi sensei's loyalty to Kumo as solid as the Raikage believed, or was he being recruited by Konoha? Fourth, Kura was pondering his, and his, sister's, origins. None of them really looked the part, and there were no other owl-partnered clans in Kaminari no Kuni, should they be as loyal, considering the suicide mission that the Raikage had given them kidnap a main branch Hyuga. They'd heard horror stories of what had happened the last time, they'd gotten a body to study, but someone from Konoha had been generous, and also given them some free explosive seals on the body as well, as Kumo seemed to believe. He doubted it, they were seen as worthless and expendable, it seemed. It was his 5th train of thought though, that was most prominent in his awareness. Did he want to win? If he won against this Tamari, he'd have proven his strategies, yes, but the girl herself seemed somewhat distracted, and only truly relaxed once her brother had killed someone. He would also then have to fight this Uzumaki, and if the name wasn't enough of a warning to leave him be, his performance against Iowa's Marble Maiden was. He found himself in his customary pose, balanced on one foot on a kunai, facing the Suna Kunoichi who held her fan over one shoulder. But the perfect strategy was right there in front of him, with a vast number of contingencies and an insane amount of flexibility. He just hoped he had the means to pull this off. Tamari moved as soon as the Kumo genin did, her fan deflecting his kunai away while it remained closed, then swung open to sever the trailing wire with the chakra-sharpened edge. You won't catch me like that, she boasted, as she returned the favor with a blast of wind that hammered where Kura had been seconds earlier, the young man having slid away on the wire standing taut between the kunai he'd stood on, and another he'd thrown while she deflected the one aimed at her. A quick glance around revealed the kunai, and numerous connecting wires, all around, although being tight stretched between the arrayed kunai, she didn't believe they could be used to trap her. That odd trick he used to slide along the wires could get annoying, though, and she grabbed one of the kunai to disrupt the web of wires. A blinding light and deafening crack later and she was lying against the stadium wall, twitching as she fought to stand. A calm voice spoke next to her, level, but amused. What do you think of my jutsu? Kura asked the Suna Kunoichi. I call it my lightning step technique. It gives me mobility, and I get to defend myself from anyone fool enough to touch the web. It's going to take a while for your nervous system to realign, so. He reached out with a red marker and drew a line across her throat. I win, I guess. Don't feel too bad. It's just the luck of the draw. In the cage's box, the cage didn't even twitch. Another failed tool, he murmured. Was this alliance really worth it? Perhaps if he got the Aikibi another way. No, it was too late to change the plan now. He'd just have to hope that Kabuto could get that Uchiha for him in the confusion. 7. Aburame Shino vs 8. Nusuma Fukuro. The Aburame seats were filled. The men and women of the clan had gathered to show their support of their young representative, and so sat clustered around his parents and his young sister, too young for her first colony. Shibi and Hotaru kept their eyes on their son, the first male Aburame in generations to be permitted to sign the Mantis Ridge summoning contract. Shino, for his part, didn't seem bothered by the surveillance of his performance. His coat had been replaced, a longer, better cut one had been given to him, and the staff he'd once used replaced with some new weapons that the Kamakiri Kaseki herself had taught him to use. Between the greatcoat, his sunglasses and his Aburame reserve, it was nearly impossible to tell what he was thinking. The scroll across his back didn't detract from, but rather accented, the image he now gave. Fukuro looked at him as she performed the same merger trick she had used at the preliminaries, and as the two owl girls launched into the sky, Shino sighed. He thrust his hands forward, and his new weapon sprang from his sleeves to his hands, the Naijuten Kamakiri. Tenten drooled a little when she saw them, the folded steel elegant in its unmarked simplicity. The blades were similar to those of katanas, but they curved forwards from the hilt, and were only sharp on that inside edge. The blades suddenly turned a dull gray as they were surrounded by stone, and it was quickly obvious that Shino was pouring earth chakra into them, as his Kikaichu colonies spread out in a cloud, crackling as lightning sprang from bug to bug, and Shino took a stance and froze. The blades of his swords were angled down, edge in, with his hands at shoulder height, and his elbows level with his ribs. His feet were wide set and firmly planted, and his eyes were closed. Shirohime and Fukuro circled silently as Shino waited, and waited, and waited, expressing nigh infinite patience as he stood there. Fukuro continued to circle. At first glance she'd thought Shino's stance to be full of openings, but Shirohime apparently felt differently, so the part avian Kunoichi had stepped back, so to speak, and begun a more detailed scrutiny. One that chilled her. He wasn't using his ears to sense his surroundings, somehow he was using that cloud of insects. Well, there was something she could do about that. Signaling her partner, she began to climb, and she started her swoop at the same instant that Shirohime used her wings to start the Fuden, great breakthrough. As the gust of wind forced a wide swath through the cloud of beetles, she was already moving fast, and her silent wings gave her the edge in an area devoid of insects, so why was he moving? The spark that flickered across in front of her was the last clue. His Kikaichu weren't there to detect anything, they were a decoy from the real detection method, the spark net he'd set them to build, so he could spot when she attacked. Mentally, she kicked herself for spending more time drooling over her last opponent than training to meet this one. As the stone-covered blades hit, she was driven from consciousness and the match was done. Polite applause from the Hyuga and Aburame seats surprised many, but Shino merely smiled behind his high collar as he put away his swords. 9. Hyuga Hinata vs 10. Hyuga Neji. As Neji strode to the center of the stadium, his cousin trailing in his wake, as she was fated to do, a niggling moment of doubt surfaced. She had gotten this far after all, and that thought could not and would not be dismissed so easily. Nor could the thought of what she had managed in the preliminaries. Her corrupted version of the gentle fist had taken down another ninja, but surely the pure version would triumph, wouldn't it? He ran his Byakugan across his cousin, taking in her leggings, shirt, and that dratted jacket she prized like a blasted engagement ring. As he took the stance that was so familiar, the unstoppable gentle fist, he smirked. He could do this. Hinata stared at her cousin, trying hard to resist the fear that was there inside her. She'd never beaten Hanabi before, her self-doubt kept saying, so how could she beat Neji? Another voice, that sounded a lot like her Naru-kun's, was screaming encouragement at her, though, pushing her forwards to show all that she could do. But I have to fight Neji ni-san, what if I can't beat him? There was a pause as if not even her inner voice could answer that, and then she heard her Naru-kun whisper softly. Then you learn from it, pick yourself up and try again, isn't that part of our Nindo? The Hyuga stands were silent. The elders of course supported Neji's traditional style over Hinata's new one, but Hiyashi had seen something there that they'd missed. The gentle fist was a rigid, defined and codified style that relied on a particular set of maneuvers, where the gentle storm seemed to adapt to the defenses raised against it, constantly changing. As Hayate called, Hajime, Neji struck first, but with words rather than blows. Fate has decreed you lose today, he said, firmly, and I am just its instrument to put you in your place. After all, how can you win? You have been weak so long, and just because some loser decided to take advantage of your naive and soft-hearted nature, you run to his side and call it victory. You are weak still, and he is a monster to do this. As Neji began, at first Hinata felt he was right, and if he'd stuck to insulting her, it could have ended differently, as Hinata had been conditioned to believe that she could not defeat her family. But when his target drifted to Naruto, Hinata quietly bit her thumb and reached inside her jacket, swiping as she murmured a release similar to Naruto's, Fuinjutsu, Sanjuryoku Fuji, release. As Neji called her beloved Naru-kun a monster, she disappeared from sight only to reappear behind him, striking for his tenketsu. Kaden, he yelled, performing the rotation defense that surprised almost everyone present, as it was considered an exclusively main house skill. Tenten's whoop of joy and triumph informed Hiyashi that the pair's periods of absence had not been for typical teenage reasons. As Neji slowed, a spiraling circle of disturbed ground around him, Hinata was there, just beyond it, unhurt, and rushed in again, resulting in a second Kaden, before Neji noticed something. Both times, she had not channeled her chakra to her hands. Now she did, melding wind and water and lightning. That wasn't good. She was there, right in front of him, as he entered the famous gentle fist attack, taking it further than anyone knew he could. 8 trigrams, 128 palms. He struck with incredible precision and speed, but wherever he hit, she wasn't there, always just a fraction beyond his reach. Neji-san, she said as his furious assault ceased, for the first time since she'd met him dropping the knee from his honorific, which actually frightened him a little, you talk too much. Her response to him was brutal, swift and merciless. When he struck for her tenketsu again, she met the strike with her own, catching his fingers on her palm. Gentle storm. Chakra shockwave. As her power rippled up his arm, the wind element ravaging his chakra coils along the path the water element created, and the lightning element dancing along his nerves in its wake, his entire arm simply failed him. There was no control, no style or discipline, no grace, as it simply dropped, useless, to his side, pulling him a fraction off balance, and her second strike hit his opposite leg, carrying him to the floor. Struggling, he went to reopen his tenketsu with his other hand, but Hinata had it in her grip. I wouldn't, she said, firmly but gently. You need to see Tsunade-sama to deal with this damage. Trying to reopen them without mending the chakra coils would give you limited use, but then it would burn those coils out for good. Neji went white. If you hadn't insulted Naruto-kun, the Hyuga girl went on as the medics approached and Hayate declared the winner, you might have beaten me. But you did. He isn't a monster, Ni-san. He freed you, and the rest of the branch house, and you still see something he isn't. He has suffered, but he took strength from it and flew. You chose to be a bird, huddled in a cage that had no door, too scared to fly. Maybe now we can throw away the cage.